I just got a text from Tom Berland. He said Zoom isn't letting him in. Any suggestions, Dave?
Yeah, well, I'll send him the agenda and he can try to go in through the public link and I can move
Here he
him over.
comes.
Oh, there he is.
Oh, good. Good evening, Tom. So the only member we're waiting for is Dr. Hay. And she was a maybe. She's up in the Catskills and in an area of very spotty cellular and Wi-Fi coverage. She was going to try to get on. And she was going to either call me or text me. So I think we might give her another minute. Certainly she deserves a little vacation time with all the time she's spent this past year dealing with COVID over at Yale New Haven. Give her 1 minute. Okay, well, let's begin the meeting. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of June 17th, 2021. It will begin a face-filled screen, so let me introduce the members of the commission. We may have Dr. Shona Hay. She's not online at the moment. However, we do have Joel Miller, Giselle McDowell, our Vice Chair Jim Madison, Tom Berland, John Mathers, Elliot Hitchcock, Joe Banofsky, and our alternates, Peter Roos, Ron Bodenson, and Carol Snow. We also have, of course, Dave Anderson, our town planner. Peter Gelderman, our town attorney, may be appearing. He's in another hearing for a town down in Fairfield County, but he's available if we need him. And I'm sorry to report that Marlene Kennedy, our clerk, fell and severely injured, broke her arm. Correct, Dave?
Sure.
Yeah, that's correct. She fell and dislocated her elbow, but then broke, I guess, a bone in her right forearm. So she's having surgery, hopefully in the next few days, to get that all corrected. And I will say she offered to try to do the minutes with her left hand, and I told her that, thank you very much, but why don't you rest up and we'll hopefully catch you the next time. So hopefully she has a speedy recovery.
Well, we all wish her the best. And if you hear anything, keep us posted, okay? Because she's in some respects the heart and soul of the commission with
Right. And
minutes.
some of folks may have heard, but Mary Habre, our newly or recently retired land use assistant, is on as an attendee taking the minutes tonight. So we're in good hands still.
So welcome back, Mary. We just can't get rid of you. You're that valuable. So glad to have you. First on our agenda, we have a public hearing. Oh, and let me, because he sat on an earlier application, the ledges, I'm going to then, unless Dr. Hay does show in the next few moments, I'll seek Peter Roos to replace Dr. Hay. Our first item on our agenda is application 20-03. It's a public hearing regulation amendment. The petitioner is the Madison Planning and Zoning Commission. It's a petition to amend section 3.4C of the Madison zoning regulations by eliminating the struck through text. And I will read it and I will let you know what the struck through text is. Section C reads philanthropic, educational, recreation, or religious use. And we are striking the words by a duly incorporated nonprofit governmental unit or community association. At that point, it picks up and with the remaining language, excluding correctional institutions and institutions for support of persons with mental disabilities. Uses permitted in this section, you had a building coverage of 15%. And this has been continued from March 19th, 2020. So Dave, can you fill us in on this, update us?
Yeah, so this was something we discussed BC before COVID. We actually had a discussion about this at our February 2020 planning meeting, where I had informed the commission at the time that there was a potential project for a recreational use that was to be for profit. And I had at the time, and that proposal is no longer in the hopper, but the discussion that ensued because of it was an informed discussion by the commission. So we had talked about, if you look at this language, it allows certain uses by special exception in the residential zone, but today has a requirement that the ownership be by a duly incorporated nonprofit body, governmental unit, or community association. So back in February of 2020, we had a discussion of whether the commission felt from a land use perspective that we should be differentiating between forms of ownership for land use. And I think the discussion basically ensued, if you have a soccer field and there's a kind of a land use impact of a soccer field, does it really matter whether it's owned by a for-profit entity or a not-for-profit entity? So we had a pretty robust discussion about that, and I think the commission landed on the fact that no, I don't think we as a commission are concerned with the form of ownership. We care a bit more about what the actual use is and what the potential impact might be. So we had agreed at that time to schedule a public hearing to consider amending the regulation as up on the screen now and as Ron read. And that public hearing was actually canceled because we canceled the meeting at the very early stages of COVID. And somewhat embarrassingly, kind of was going through everything in preparation for my departure and realized that we never actually circled back to this. I know we purposely didn't bring it forward right away because we were, the Zoom meetings were new to us at the time, and we weren't sure that the Planning and Zoning Commission wanted to bring something forward through the Zoom format. I think we've since learned that we do get a lot of participation through Zoom, so that's not so much of a barrier. So I brought this to your attention tonight. If folks are comfortable and remember any of these dialogues, you could take action on it, but there's obviously also no pressure to do so. So if you felt that, hey, let's talk about it a little bit tonight and continue it to our next meeting, that's a fine resolution as well. But I didn't want to kind of quote unquote skip town without bringing this back to your attention. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions for Dave? Dave, can you see them on the screen? I still have the document up there, so I can't see it.
I'll stop sharing because I don't think I need to have this language up.
Anyone have any questions for Dave? Seeing none from the commission.
Yeah, Dave.
Joe Banofsky.
Ron, I actually have one.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, okay. I thought he was calling on
Oh,
Joe.
Tom, I'm sorry, it was Joe. You're a little dark.
And Dave, I may actually have to call in because my internet connection is a little choppy. But is there a reason why we exclude institutions supporting individuals with mental disabilities?
So we did not talk about that language at all when we brought forth this regulation amendment. So, and that language exists today and it existed, prior to my coming to Madison. So I haven't participated in any discussions about that. So it's a valid question. I think if the commission wants to enter in discussions about that, I would do so, and kind of maybe I don't really know the.
Yeah.
I could do some research. I don't
Yeah, I think, I'm not quite sure why,
Including that language initially.
yeah, I'm not sure why it's there, but honestly, as long as we're opening it up, I actually find that pretty offensive. So I'd like to take care of it and eliminate that.
That will be a separate process, of course, but it's a point. Thanks. Any other questions from the commission? Okay, this is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public who have questions of what Dave just covered? Raise your hand electronically, please.
I'm not seeing any hands at the moment, Ron.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions from our end? Again, I'll go back to the public. If there is someone who would like to speak in favor of the language being stricken.
Followed by pound.
I don't know what that was. Is that someone from the public, Dave?
No, it was not.
Is there any member of the public who would like to speak in opposition to the striking this language from the amendment or from the regulation? None?
No.
Okay. Anything else from the commission? Then I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing from a member. Anybody wish to do so?
So moved.
Tom Burland, second by John Mathers. Okay. Discussion? Call the vote. All in favor of the change, signify by raising their hand, saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Amendment approved. Second item on the agenda is application 21-09. This was, we heard this last month, or the month before, excuse me.
Dave?
250,
Dave,
Yes, Mary.
we need an effective date.
Yeah, so we can do an effective date of, let's set the effective date for next Friday. And we'll get it published on the website tomorrow, but we'll set the effective date for next week.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Matt. Again, application 21-09, 250 Sampson Rock Drive, map 38, lot 51 in the R2 district. The owner is the Bank of America. The applicant is Andrew Rainone from the Horton Group LLC. And it's just special exception permit modification for work being done to existing drive-up teller lane by removing the tube system and place an automatic teller machine in its place. Additional security lighting will be installed. Is there anyone here from the representing the applicant tonight?
Hello, Ron. This is Andrew. I also have Josh Wagner from GMR to assist with our presentation this afternoon.
Good evening. How are you both, gentlemen?
I'm doing well.
Oh, great.
Okay. If you just want to briefly summarize what you're planning to do, again, we did hear it in some detail, but there may be some members of the public who weren't with us in that night.
So I'll share my screen real quick here. Let's see.
Please.
Okay. So here's the proposed lighting plan. The fixtures that are marked in blue will be new wall packs added to the side of the building. We have fixtures in green, our existing fixtures will be replacing with LED canopy mount fixture here. This will be a wall pack here. 4 canopy mount fixtures beneath the drive up. And then we have 2 proposed poles replacing existing poles. One here with 2 heads, another here with 2 heads. Let me get to the civil drawings. Josh,
Ron, do you know if Andrew was speaking all this time?
looks like I might have been muted. I apologize.
Yeah, I think so. You were.
Yeah, having some issues. Let's see. Is my screen sharing still?
You might want to start over, Andrew. You're sharing the
Okay.
Zoom screen.
Okay, let me see. Okay, here we have the lighting plan. We've got lights in blue are new wall packs. 3 of them on the building, 1 here, here, and here. We've got 4 canopy mount fixtures replacing existing fixtures here. 2 new poles. There's actually existing poles here being replaced. We'd like to put in taller poles with 4 new LED heads total, 2 on each. A existing canopy mount fixture here being replaced with LED. A wall pack here existing being replaced. And then everything in yellow is existing lights out of scope. Let's see, I have some photos of the site I took that night. That's what I was showing before. This is actually the neighboring bank, just to show an example. They have a floodlight here on the entrance. This is the wash into the back of their property, Citizens Bank. This is the drive-up ATM of the neighboring business. They have very bright floodlights in back compared to the Bank of America. Let's see. Here's a couple photos of the Bank of America. We've got the existing canopy lighting, the exit lane, and this is the overall rear of the building of the bank. Josh, do you have anything to add?
No, not this time. I think the reason why we pushed this off to the second meeting
was for members of the board to go by the bank and look at it for themselves and try to make their own assessment on why the lighting should be necessary or if it's not necessary. So I think we've set our piece. We're trying to meet security standards per the bank. Our only light trespass on this bank is going on to another bank where there's already floodlights pointed at the property line. So if we were to go out and do a property line survey as it is right now, we'd be failing in direct course to the other bank. I think that's all that I have to add right now. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys might have regarding the lighting at the site.
Ron, you're muted.
Seems to be a disease tonight. Have any members of the commission had the opportunity to visit the site after dark and do their own assessment?
Tom, I think if you're on your cell phone, I gave that phone permission to talk to me. You just need to unmute it. There you go.
Okay. Yep. Brian, I did get a chance to drive by.
And what was your impression?
You know, I don't think that the additional light is warranted, and you know, I think it's sufficient today,
Anybody else? Get the chance?
irrespective of the competing bank and their lights.
All right.
Ron,
Yes, Peter.
yeah, I went by it as well, and I agree with Tom. I think the lighting is sufficient, and it would be overkill to add some of the additional lights that are suggested.
Okay. Anyone else get out there? Jim Madison.
Yeah, same for me.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Yeah, Ron, you know, I went by there. I don't really have a problem with the additional lights. I don't think that my biggest concern was whether it's going to be would be a nuisance to the properties such as the Scranton Seahorse Inn. I'm not so concerned with how it affects the Citizens Bank. And I didn't think it would really impact the Scranton Seahorse Inn. The only lighting fixtures I have a question about are the two poles that are apart from the building. As you're driving through the drive-through, they would be on your right. They're pretty small poles right now, and the plan calls for replacing them with double-headed fixtures. I'm just curious how tall those double-headed fixtures would be, those new poles, because the existing poles almost look like, you know, residential, what you'd find on someone's front lawn.
Yeah, those poles are called out to be 16 foot above finished grade, specifically for the full compliance area.
So I think that would be the biggest, most significant difference in the lighting plan. I think the new fixtures on the building, I don't think they'd cause that much additional wash. But those two poles, 16 feet tall, you know, what's there now is probably what, 7 feet tall?
I think they're 6 foot, yes, sir.
Yeah. They're going from a residential 6 foot with a single lamp in it, maybe a light bulb in it, to a 16-foot pole with two commercial heads. I'm sure they're shining just down, but that's going to add a lot of additional light. I don't know if that's necessary. It's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Good points. Are there any plans to ever reopen the bank? It's been
Yes,
closed.
the bank plans on reopening.
Mhm. Okay, because if it's intended to be kind of like a slave site, you certainly don't need all that parking. In fact, I think it has more parking than it actually needs, but that's fine too. I was out there after dark. I bank at Bank of America, and I kind of agree with what Jim and Tom and Joe felt, that it seemed to be adequate. Granted that some of it is from the bank next door, but nonetheless, it's there. I think there will also be, I suspect there will also be an increase in light intensity underneath the dome or the roof over the ATM machine. That's not lit too well now. And I believe, if I remember and see correctly, that will be increased with some LED lighting. So, I would, I don't know, my preference would be to leave it alone and possibly reduce those two very tall fixtures, that are out there, but I mean, to go to up into the high teens for those lights to me seems a little bit too much, but.
Hey, Ron, this is Josh. I completely understand what you're saying. If this plan isn't what we're approving, can you let us know what will be approved so we can go back to the bank and say, hey, the city doesn't want this. This is what they're proposing that they'll approve. Are you guys okay with this still not meeting compliance per the bank standards, but still doing as much as possible within their realm of reach, right? What they're capable of approving.
Yes, and I hope you understand, Josh, that looking at it as a customer for years now, I've been going to a walk-up ATM on the outside of that building.
Yes, sir.
That as, and I guess unsafe conditions, according to Charlotte, and now with seems to be a much more secure way of doing a transaction via drive-through, that it has to be significantly, the lighting has to be significantly increased, which makes me scratch my head a little bit, but I understand as well.
Yeah, it's a newly adopted plan. They're just trying to make all the banks more well lit.
So I don't know. What do we think? What are some thoughts on approving it as presented, modifying it a little bit, allowing the LEDs on the building, but nothing more? What's everyone?
Joel's got his hand up.
Yes.
Thanks. So I guess I have a question. I guess it's more for Josh maybe than anyone else. So, you mentioned the the compliance issue with the bank itself. Is that regulation or requirement or compliance matter derivative of a widely adopted industry standard? Or is it unique to that particular bank?
So the banking laws, it depends on what state you're in. Like for instance, I'm in Texas. There's specifically financial code that is law in Texas that the 50-foot compliance area around a bank needs to be at a minimum of 2 foot candles, regardless of where the property line is. Same with New York. New York has specific laws that says 2 foot candles to 50 foot, 1 foot candles to 60 foot past the property line. Doesn't matter where the property line is, you have to light all the way out. Because at the end of the day, and I know this site is probably pretty safe, but at the end of the day, if somebody's going to do something harmful to somebody utilizing a bank, they don't care about the property line. They're going to find somewhere dark to hide and they're going to utilize it, right? Which is what we found to be true in the past. So yes, it is a widely adopted plan that we use in multiple states. Connecticut doesn't have specific law stating that. So we're kind of at the liberty of what you guys think is appropriate at the bank. And then we'll go back and present it to them, say, hey, they don't want these lights. They think it's too much. Here's what we can do. Will you approve it or will you cancel it? And that's just kind of the hands we're dealt at this point.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, I think it seems like what we're hearing is it would be appropriate to replace the lights on the building and under the canopy with the new ones, but not to put in the new 16-foot poles with the 2 LED heads. Is that what I'm thinking? I'm hearing anyway?
I think that's right.
So while we're talking about that, I have an additional question. I have in the past used a more traditional type pole with just replacing pole heads. Because what you have out there now is like old incandescent bulbs that go in there. What we'd replace it with is an LED pole fixture at that same height. So keeping the aesthetics of the whole, building, not having the differentiating light, making it look a little odd and off. Would you guys be open to that as well? We've replaced the Y4s as well, the other poles, just so it all matches and looks good.
Thank you. Commission thoughts? Jim, I see your hand
Yeah,
flash.
I mean, I would be okay with that.
John shaking his head. Anybody else wish to?
I would be okay with that as well.
Thanks, Giselle.
If I could add, everyone, the existing poles there are in very rough shape. We would definitely have to replace the pole completely. It's a small direct burial pole, but if it would be allowed, we could certainly do like a 8-foot pole, colonial style, with a new footing and a decorative head on top that doesn't output as nearly as much as the 16-foot that are proposed.
Yeah, that's what I was going to propose, Andrew. Probably like a 8 to 10 foot traditional. It looks really nice. It doesn't do much for compliance, but aesthetics wise, it would keep us in the same ballpark.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between 8 and 10. It seems like we're incrementally getting higher.
Oh yeah, we can go back to 8. I would just throw a number out there. I'm sorry. If 8 or 6 is fine, whatever you guys feel appropriate. 6 foot would be below my head, so it just seems kind of small to me. But it's up to you guys ultimately.
Hey, Dave, how does this align with dark sky lighting standards? Does it?
Well, the new
Is that-
fixtures that they're proposing are down lighting. But I
Okay.
think the intensity of the light that was proposed with the 16-foot tall fixtures was excessive. So I
Just
think
to
that-
clarify, all of our fixtures are dark sky compliant.
You said they are dark sky compliant?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. So what do we think? 8 feet? Allow that?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
8's okay.
Okay,
I'd really rather not be in the commission that made the lights go lower and something happens and it's like, well, they could have had the higher lights, but the commission said no.
Yeah,
8 feet.
I hear you, Joel, but these particular lights we're talking about are really, they're illuminating the parking lot. And what we're talking about is a drive-through ATM, which I think is going to be well lit under the canopy as this plan shows. These pole lights are a little bit removed and they're more parking lot lights. I don't know if people are going to be parking at night. Bank's closed.
Well, just to tie onto that, I've gone into a couple of litigations pertaining to this, and if something does happen, they do look at the lighting in the full 50-foot radius. I can confirm that for you, and just to make sure that all the areas around the ATM were well lit. I had this conversation multiple times, and then when that happens, we'll come back to this conversation. If it happens, it probably won't, 9 times out of 10, it won't. But that one time it does, it'll go back to this conversation and say, hey, no, the lights were specifically not approved.
Yeah, but then their choice for the bank is then to move forward with the project or not. So
Exactly.
ultimately, it's the bank's responsibility, not the Planning and Zoning Commission's responsibility.
Right, but it was,
Right.
yes, but it was denied by the planning board, right? And then that's all on the bank, and if they,
And then, so the bank can make a decision on what to do.
would the bank then, if they found they were that exposed and that liable, I assume then they would close the walk-up ATM immediately as well, right?
Correct.
yeah, that would be on the bank's decision.
I'm sure that's not the world we live in the banking world today. They'd like candles if they needed to have an ATM and let alone a walk-up. So I find that a questionable argument, quite frankly. Yes, Ron Bodenson, is that your?
I think we're looking at this in the summertime. In the wintertime, at 4:30, it's dark. So I think there needs to be parking lot lighting, 8 feet, full cutoff, dark sky compliant. Wintertime is just a different scenario on people coming and going. I don't know if the bank employees park there and they leave work at 6 o'clock. It's absolutely dark out. So I wouldn't object to it to cover the parking lot.
No, and that's what they have now, Ron, is covering the parking lot. It's replacing those two fixtures that cover the
Right.
parking. Understand it correctly. Yes, I think we're in agreement, I think, on allowing those to remain and be updated, but not to grow to 17 or 18 feet.
Right.
Is that kind of where we're coming from?
Yeah, I think we are. I'm hearing 8 feet. That's what I would be comfortable with.
You want to make a motion to that effect, Jim, and we can discuss it?
Okay. I will move that we approve the special exception permit modification for that work to allow them to replace the tube system and put in the automated teller machine. The lighting on the building can be updated as proposed, and the 2 pole lights we would approve going to a height of 8 feet and putting in the new compliant lighting.
Okay. You have a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Joe? Any further discussion?
I know that we talked about this a little earlier. The poles out in the parking lot are 15 foot further out, just so we're all on the same page.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry. I meant the motion. It's the 6 foot lights, 6 foot poles that I'm speaking of.
8.
The current 6 feet poles to be replaced by 8 feet.
Yep.
Thank you, John.
Okay. Is that clear? Any discussion? Comment?
I'm not as good as I once was, but I can cover 50 feet pretty darn quickly. I'd be inclined to approve it as applied, but something's better than nothing.
Thanks, Joel. All right, then, if no one has anything else to discuss, I'll call the vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. Thank you, Bank of America. Good luck with your new ATM.
Thank you, guys. Have a
Thank
good
you,
one.
everyone.
Have a good evening. Next on the agenda is application 21-11 CSP, 143 Beach Avenue. It's map 13, lot 70 in the R4 district. The owner is Paula Krompinger, and the applicant is Paula Krompinger. It's a coastal site plan review to extend rear deck by 3 feet on a FEMA compliant house that was built in 2016. So
Yeah, I pulled it up. So Tom Stevens, I believe, is on the meeting, but I think we can go through this pretty quickly. So this is the picture of the existing deck, which again, the deck is FEMA compliant. They want to extend it 3 feet towards the water, which triggers the need for a coastal site plan review under our regulations. DEP did send in comment and determined that they feel it's consistent with the goals and policies of the Connecticut Management Act. They did pay some mention to erosion and sediment control, but as you can see, this is on an existing patio. So I don't foresee any issues with this. So if anybody has any questions, Tom Stevens is available for questions, but that's the brief summary.
thanks, Dave. First, Tom, is there anything you want to add to what Dave just said?
Well, actually, it's Chuck Mandel. I'm filling in for Tom tonight. Oh, that's okay. No, just one comment is that the existing deck is above the base flood elevation, so it is above the BFE. That was just one of the comments from the coastal review from DEP. That's all I need to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion.
I'll motion to approve.
Joe Banowski, a second from Peter Roos. Thank you, Peter. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
None? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you, Dave.
Good
And
luck
good,
with your new bill. Next is application 21-13 CSP West Wharf Road, map 15, lot 33 in the R4 district. The owner is the town of Madison. The applicant is the town of Madison. It's a coastal site plan review for an after-the-fact approval of safety fencing at the town of Madison dock utilized by the Madison Fire Department, Fireboat, and by Town Parks and Recreation Department. So is there anyone here to present for or talk about the fencing?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. For the record, my name is Michael Harkin, professional engineer and principal of Harkin Engineering, located at 78 Wolf Hollow Lane in the town of Madison, Connecticut. Or town of Killingworth, Connecticut. Here today on behalf of the town of Madison, more specifically the fire department and Parks and Rec, for their emergency dock project located at West Wharf. This is a CAM application. As the chairman had said, it's for the after-the-fact approval of a security fence that was put around the dock, but it's also for the proposed security pole, security camera to watch over the boats, as well as utility services such as water, electrical, telephone, and cable that will initially be installed in the future. Just a quick blurb on the project itself. Back in 2019, the fire department had a couple calls. They went to get their fire boats that were moored up at West Wharf. They were sitting in the mud. They couldn't get them out into the water, so they had a call for mutual aid, had a call for the Coast Guard to come in as well. So from that, they came back and they talked with Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec and the fire department knew I did some coastal engineering, docks and seawalls of that nature. They contacted me. We sat down with both the fire chief, fire marshal, the head of Parks and Rec, Scott Erskine, and we basically formulated a plan on what they physically need to get done there. From that, I contacted DEP. We then got a letter from the first select woman, basically stating that, the emergency situation that we had, citing the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Within 2 days, DEP gave us an approval to install an emergency dock at the end of West Wharf, which was done in the basically June of 2020. So after that fact, the Parks and Recs in the town put up a security fence to keep kids and pedestrians off the boat dock. It's basically a security fence. After that was installed, the town didn't know that they needed to basically ask for a CAM application. Originally, they thought that would be put into a greater application that we had to do for the dock, which is a certificate of permission or COP. So the town erected it. Some of the neighbors had called and had some questions. A couple had complained. So from that, the Parks and Recs and the town went into discussions on different ways, means and methods that they can secure the dock in the area. Basically, it came down to that this fence worked the best. The fire department and Parks and Rec authorized me to submit the CAM application for both the after the fact and then those added items that I had stated previously to get installed. So with that, I'll share my screen. I'll just go over a quick overview if I can. Can you guys see that drawing that's on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what this is a survey performed by a licensed land surveyor. Where my cursor is, that is West Wharf. That's the Madison Beach Hotel. This is the parking for West Wharf. Here's the beach area. Here is the wharf itself. And then here are the moorings that are currently in place where the boats were being moored. The next drawing you see was the emergency design for the end of West Wharf to put in the dock system that you see here, those 3 lengths, which was approved again in 2 days. And then here's some photographs that you see of the dock installed and then the emergency fence that goes around it. Here's a zoomed in image. That fence did have a return section on this side that was actually knocked off in a storm. they were still trying to get the fence right with the fence company. I believe the dock and the storm surge came up and knocked that in. They were able to retrieve that, and it will be installed again properly. But you can see the system is virtually just put in to protect the dock itself, to keep the kids off, or pedestrians themselves, not just kids. You can see the latch gate that was installed as well. And then you could see the cam plan that we have installed is the utilities that we're going to run around the side of the wharf to provide the water for the fireboat, electric, and all that requirements. You can see the existing fence section that we would like to have remain. And then you could see the security pole with the security camera, so the police department or the FD can watch what's going on after hours to make sure nobody goes onto that that dock system. So with that being said, that basically ends my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the commission may have at this time. But again, it is for the, I believe, and Scott Erskine, head of Parks and Rec, is on. I believe the fence went in as an insurance measure for the town due to liability. And then also, obviously, to protect the dollar amount that's invested into the boat to make sure that it's operable for emergency conditions. And the other items that are in the CAM application are just to physically aid in the fire department with their boat on there. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody may have.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Harkins from the commission? Yes, John.
Yes, thank you. When this dock was first proposed, it was proposed as being exactly what you said, Mike, a place to park the emergency vehicle, but it was also suggested that it was going to be for public use. Was that intent changed?
No, because it was an emergency situation, to go through the normal process for a dock system and possible dredging over there, it's about an 18-month process to get approved. Having that 18-month process to go through and get approved would jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare of the general public on the water for a marine aspect. So the DEP recognized that, and they just allow us to install enough to park potentially 2 boats there. One was the fireboat. If the fire department decides to order a larger boat, they can still fit that on there. And the second thing is that we left the door open that if the town does wish in the future to add on to that dock system, there is the ability to do that. The approval from DEP for this part of the project is strictly for the fire department and the Parks and Rec.
Okay. If I may have another question, when the fence first went in, because I happened to work in that area, I got an earful from many people who just thought it was did not like the aesthetics of the fence, and thought it looked like we had caged in. I say we, the town had caged in the West Wharf. People found it very offensive. So my question is the fence really necessary? I can tell you that it doesn't keep kids off the dock, because what it becomes is a challenge to these kids who now say, oh, let's see if we can get over this fence, and they climb it and they skirt around it, and it really does not prevent people from getting on the dock that want to get on the dock. And for years, the fireboat was moored in an area where anyone who wanted to could have accessed it. I don't know why all of a sudden it's that it's on a dock, it needs to be fenced in.
Yep. So to answer that question is, originally the original application didn't, we were just dealing with the dock. So we got the dock approved. The town then went forth and put in that fence, and then we got a call that there was complaints and there was issues and there was discussions about it. I then went back to Public Works after I heard about it, and Scott Erskine had called me direct and said, it was the aesthetics. Scott assured me that he went out and actually got the most aesthetic fencing system that he can get and put in and installed there. It wasn't a cheap fence. It was the best that he can get at that time. Now, as far as the physical fence goes and the trespassing, if say, like you said, Mr. Mathers, if somebody's going to get on there, they're going to get on there. They're going to swim there. They're going to try to hop over the fence. The item is we are trying to keep them off the dock. We have to try something. This is the best and most feasible way to do that, to get that across. Now, if there was nothing there and somebody went and walked on that dock and got injured and there was zero protection there, the town is completely liable for that. At least the town has put up a barrier that says, do not enter. You cannot come here. If you do, it's unlawful. They are trying to keep them off. If somebody falls at that point, they are technically trespassing. They've been warned. They've gone above and beyond to go over that dock system or over that fence system onto that dock. So it's kind of like, hey, we're having cameras. We're putting everything that we possibly can in there. It's kind of like somebody robbing a convenience store. You can have all the cameras and all the gates. They still might try. They still are going to potentially get away with something if they have it in their mind. So, we're trying to retrofit something that people have seen there for years unobstructed. And, right now, part of the emergency authorization for this dock was to install a certificate of permission, a COP. We could not install that COP application because for about 4 months, the town was going back and forth of different ways and means to prevent people getting on the dock. So this just wasn't the only one-off view, the fence. There were other items, and we had to hold off from the COP application because if anything was going to be put on the dock system, that would have to be part of the certificate of permission to another jurisdiction of DEP. So, some people don't like it. A lot of people do like the fence. I think it comes down to personal preference. And I can say this, and Scott Erskine's on the panel right now, and if he'd like to add something, is this protection of the dock and protection of people and protection of the boat went around in many, many circles through many, many different people. And then it was finally given, they gave me the permission to file the application for what you see in front of you. So I hope that answers your question, John. I'm sorry if I was long-winded.
No, it does answer my question. I'll let Carol speak because I've been monopolizing.
No, that's great. Well, actually, I wanted to follow up on your point, John, because I've also heard that it's more of an invitation to kids to try to wiggle around the fence than, I think, no fence. And I've wondered, in that regard, if it's possible to just have a sign, if that addresses the liability issues. I know there's signs about not diving off of other rocks, and the rest of the West Wharf is pretty much open, so kids could dive off of that too. I actually kayaked over there today and got snagged in a fisherman's line. That's another issue. So that was my comment about the safety and the liability, and would signage do enough? That was one question. I wanted to also ask, is the dock, it's a floating dock, is it in year round, or is it just in this summer, main summer months?
So we can back up real quick. So there is signs on there right now, or there was until I believe the fence was taken down or blown down. It will go back up in some shape or fashion if this in fact is approved. There are other items that we looked at. One resident had brought up putting a full lock system over the boat, that the fire department would have keys. It got into, okay, now we have to give out 50 different keys. And if there's an emergency, they have to take a tarp off the boat, delaying time and, the calls out to the emergency. The reality is, you put up a trespassing sign in the woods, people are still going to trespass, right? So there really is no one perfect answer for this site. I honestly think that what the town had put in will work the best. And, what Parks and Rec had told me, listen, this might not be the permanent solution, this fence. They're still working, they're still discussing, but something has to be done, to try to prevent people from getting on there. Right now there's just a gate going down to, set of steps going down to the dock. We're trying to put in the security pole with the camera so the police department can, keep an eye on it from the PD. The reality is that unless it's enforced, unless kids seeing other kids getting lectured by the police or by town officials, they're still going to try to get up on there. There's not really much that I could say to that. The town has to try something to keep them off and keep that dock protected. If they don't, they open themselves up to liability.
Is the dock, sorry, is the dock in year round or is it just during the summer months?
So the dock is made to be taken up if need be, but it can also stay in, year round. It's in an area and position where the wave action for storm events, nor'easters won't really have a direct impact on it, but that dock can, in the wintertime be taken out.
Even though a section of the fence has already been knocked off by a storm.
That is correct. I just don't think the levels were set. Again, I wasn't involved in that whole fence being set, so I don't know physically what happened on that aspect. I was just told that one side was set a little bit too lower and the float came up and with the wave action and actually hit it. You can see the other side was set correctly and that stayed in place without any issues.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions?
So,
from the-
Mike, yeah, just, one other, suggestion or question, I guess. From a ladder perspective, because I mean, honestly, I haven't heard anybody say anything to me, but I think it's pretty unattractive. For a nice setting that has historically not had a barrier like that on it, I do think that it's unattractive. Is there a way, alternatively, because as you said, people are getting around it anyway. From a key system standpoint, even if you lock you have to lock the gate to prevent people from going, so you still have the same key system issue, right?
Yeah.
Would it be as simple as putting a cover over the ladder system so that people can't get access to the ladder, and the fire department can come, unkey it, pull the cover off, go down, and then have the appropriate no trespassing signs, have the signs that this is the camera system is recording all of the activity, trespassers will be prosecuted, and try to prevent it that way, as opposed to putting something that's really an eyesore.
Yes, sir. Just to let you know that, that item was looked at and discussed. Again, we kicked around items for 3 months at a round table and had, certain discussions. The reason that item didn't work is when you put the cover over the ladder, that works at low tide conditions. But if I can go to my share screen and show everybody, let me see if I can get to the, you can see at high tide in the picture shown, what we're worried about is high tide and that fence not being there and children or people, individuals getting up on the rail and then leaping over onto the dock at high tide conditions. That's why I specifically took this picture at high tide. You can see how high the dock comes up and you can see the gap in between. My real concern is, and you can see the ladder in the background, is that somebody falls off and gets stuck in between the dock and the physical wharf system itself. This fence at least prevents that. That's not to say that they're not going to hop over it and then come on here. At least we're doing our best to protect them. You can see that the town did, although there wasn't at the time a camera there, did put up no trespassing signs. You could see it right there, right by the gate. So again, those items were looked at. The best I can say is this might not be the save all end all. Talking to Parks and Rec, they're still discussing. The whole item of submitting this was, we have to get something up. We can't just leave it like it is due to the liability. So, if and I think that Scott Erskine might be able to speak on this a little bit more, is, they're still discussing it. Temporary or permanent hasn't been decided yet, but everybody realizes that something has to be done.
Scott, do you have anything to say? Scott, unmute.
I just asked him to unmute. Because I think Mike asked him 4 times.
Hey, you can't make progress here. Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we found through all our observations with the new dock system at West, we ended up seeing things that we didn't realize that were going to happen. And that was the docks were floating up, and you could actually step right from the top of the wharf right onto the dock. So that's why we ended up trying to curtail that type of use with the fencing that we installed. Unfortunately, we just miscued on the install, and when we had a really high storm, the wing that we had was not long enough, and the wing got clipped with the dock coming up, and that's why it ripped out. It worked well for the fire department. They were very happy with it, and I think a lot of it last year, I think there was a lot with enthusiasm from the younger generation, something to jump off of, and we just have to educate as to why we're doing what we did, and it's for public safety. But the fencing does work, and I think it's warranted to protect any asset that we're talking about now, because boats are not cheap, and they tend to get walked on, the whole 9 yards. So I think every precaution that we can take is needed.
But boy, it's an ugly Band-Aid for a bad boo-boo.
I'd be curious whether any transparent material was considered, acrylic, plexiglass. Anybody who has a good view of water and has to put up a fence on their patio usually ends up with some kind of really hard material like acrylic where you see through. And if you had that kind of fencing there from 50 feet away, you wouldn't see it. But I don't know, Mike, maybe there's a downside to that. I think the fence needs to go in or be permitted, but if a transparent fence is a possibility, then over the next period of time, that could be switched out, perhaps.
Yeah, again, I wasn't in the whole discussion and choosing of the fence option here. I was brought in kind of after the fence was already up to go through the permitting process. Again, we can look into different items. You're approving a fence, a barrier, basically. What that barrier is now or in the future may change, but it's just the realization that some type of barrier has to go up there. Now, we've done designs many a times around swimming pools or on decks, Ron, like he had said, by putting up plexiglass, or a plexiglass type system where it's clear, it's see-through. Every 6 to 8 feet just has one black wire panel to hold it in. That may be an option to go with. I can't make those physical decisions myself. That has to go to a bunch of different committees, the fire department, Parks and Rec, but I'm willing to entertain it if it works. Absolutely. I think what happens in this situation though, Ron, is that the straight plexiglass clear sections, we can't just use one pane or multiple panes, the solid structure, because one wave will just take it out due to the weight. That's why Scott, I believe, had chose the slotted fence to let the water pour through.
And if I can interject, that we're doing this as a intermediate solution, because the long-term goal for the overall project is to have a system where we can bring in injured people from rescues and not have to climb them up a ladder. We would have a ramp system that would stay consistent with the wharf. So we can load them on a gurney and bring them to shore without hoisting them up onto the wharf. Worst case scenarios, we're coming in at low tide for the fire department, and you have an 8-foot rise, 8 to 10 foot rise to get somebody up and out. We want to make it that as smooth as possible, and that is the second phase of what we're trying to do. Is to bring that docking system all the way up onto the beach, so we can get them into a rescue unit and off to the hospital.
Joe, please.
I have a couple questions. I mean, I'm down in that area all the time. It's very typical for me to make a morning drive with a cup of coffee and walk down to that wharf frequently. I do know that fence is there. I didn't notice it or find it really obnoxious. However, as somebody who's been around boats and in and out of marinas for many, many years, it's common knowledge to me that anybody can walk onto any boat in any marina at any time. And anybody with a lick of common sense knows that that is very egregious and off limits. You could go to the Clintontown docks, you could go to any of the marinas in Brantford, Guilford, Westbrook, anywhere, and walk onto any yacht you want unobstructed. I think, in my opinion, and again, I don't necessarily have a problem with the fence that's there right now. I don't. But a far greater deterrent in my mind would be a couple of poles with a couple of cameras pointing right at that pole that are so obvious, and a sign that says, this vessel and dock is under constant 24-hour surveillance. Violators will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, no trespassing. I mean, to me, that is a way bigger deterrent than a fence, because anybody who wants to get over or around a fence will. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Hey, Ron?
Yes, Jim.
Yeah, Jim. Okay, so I'm glad Joe mentioned the Clinton, because the Clinton fire boat and police boat over there, same thing. It's just right at a dock, anybody can get on. My view would be, just from the liability standpoint, and I'm not sure how this holds up in court, but rather than have the fence, have the 6-inch high black and yellow striped line, and have the signs and the cameras, and remove the fence.
Thank you, Jim. Anyone else have a comment? One thing that came into my head, and I'm getting a little out of the subject, but it's still on it. Scott, when you're talking about looking at different things for safety and so forth, as a learning experience, it might be very helpful as these plans evolve, that planning and zoning come before us with an informational presentation about what is being thought of, what's being planned to do, so you can get this type of reaction from the commission and not run into a situation like we have now, And now is after the fact even. But I think to be preemptive about that would be very helpful for everybody's benefit. So that's number one. Number two, I think there are a lot of good points made by the commission members tonight. But two things. Number one, there to me are other alternatives that have to be discussed. Could you put the fence on the dock? On the north, west, and east sides along the perimeters or offset from the perimeter to protect the vessels. Large gates could swing open and the boats could be accessed and used. And you wouldn't have that aesthetic problem, nor would the fence have to be as high. Just a thought, not a recommendation. I mean, there are other things, hopefully you're looking at it that way. And the second thing that occurs to me is that, I think we have to be, we as a commission have to realize that it does right now, as unattractive as it is, it serves a purpose. And that some leeway should be given if the commission decides that it should come down, that, how we do that and still protect the vessels and the public, by giving time through the season or what have you, and work through it that way. So those are my thoughts on it.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may real quick, to just a couple points to everybody's discussion is, Joe, like you had said, part of this approval is for the security pole and security camera to be put up there right directly adjacent to that with the signs. So that has been thought of, and that is part of the application. The chairman had brought up potentially putting the fence on the dock system. Case in point, why I did not submit the COP application to the state of Connecticut. If we were waiting to hear different things and different ideas, because if I did put the fence on there, then I would have to retract that COP application and submit another one, which is very lengthy and costly for the town. So it may, in fact, at some point go on that dock. I think that the town is looking for an approval of all these different items just to protect the boat as it is. And then they're still having discussions. And one of the conditions of approval may be that the fence discussion, as it progresses, comes back to the Planning and Zoning Commission for approvals. It's, some people are saying it could be interim. People are saying it could be permanent. I think the discussion's still out, but I do think that something has to be done in the interim to protect that boat, protect the dock, and protect the citizens. That's just kind of my 2 cents in the whole matter.
And Ron, I think Joe's comment about the security cameras signs, is a far better deterrent than just personal opinion. But I would be fine in approving the security cameras and signage.
I'd like to comment on that as well. I couldn't agree more with Joe and Jim and what Tom just said. I think that signage and cameras, well-written signage and cameras would deter as well as the fence goes. But my mind was actually changed tonight when Mike brought up the photograph that showed the dock at high tide, and I could easily envision a child falling down between the dock and the pier and getting crushed. There's an awful lot of families down there, and I think that's one thing, is have a fence to keep adults from being mischievous. But I'm now thinking that fence is necessary to protect children, and I don't like the fence, but that photograph was impactful to me.
And again, guys, that aluminum fence, I believe it's aluminum, that was installed there. I mean, there could be potentially a cable fence system that you see on all the houses there that still gives you the view lane to look through it and is not so obstructive. I think that somebody just made the realization at high tide after the dock was installed, we may have a potential problem where people may be jumping in or can get hurt. Let's put something in. What's the most decorative thing that we can put in right now? And that's what was chosen. And then it's been up for discussion ever since. I think it's still going to be up for discussion long after this meeting. But again, whatever way the town planning and zoning, the fire department, Parks and Recs like to go, I'm happy to design something or, that works for everybody if I can.
Ron, if I may, I'd like to piggyback off of what John just said. As I started my comments, I said I'm not for or against the fence. I've seen it there. I don't think it's an albatross. I'd rather it not be there, but I don't think it's awful.
Mhm.
I do agree with what John just said. I mean, at high tide, so an adult or a young adult who, I mean, somebody who's looking to do something mischievous, if they want to, the fence is not going to stop them. A sign and a camera might, a fence will not. However, as to John's point, because the applicant has proposed really two completely different reasons, unapologetically, for the need for this fence. One is for safety and the other is for security of the vessel. And they are two separate things. At high tide, that picture, I can actually see somebody young and not nimble trying to make the step from the wharf to the dock and maybe missing. And that would be bad. So I guess from the safety perspective, some sort of fencing would help curtail that. As far as the type of fence that was just brought up, I mean, those stainless steel bollards with the stainless steel line going through it, I mean, that, in my opinion, that's one of the more attractive type fences, but I'm not going to get into a decorative conversation. So I think now listening to John's argument, I would be willing to approve a fence, but I absolutely want to approve poles, signs, and cameras.
Okay. Anything else?
Ron, before you go, yeah, I have one thing. So we have, this is not a public hearing, but I want to bring to your attention, there are two attendees with their hands raised. Joe Mako has had his hand raised for a while, as is James McLean. So bring that to your attention.
I would certainly allow that, particularly if you don't know Joe Mako. Joe has, I believe, 100,000 ton, all seas, all ocean master's license. He can captain any vessel in the world as a harbor pilot and retired. So if anybody knows what we're dealing with, it's Joe Mako. So glad to hear his input.
All right, so Joe, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you may need to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay, well, I'm not speaking as a professional mariner. I'm speaking as a grandfather. 2 years ago, I took my 7-year-old grandson down to West Wharf, and he fished, and he caught his first fish there. And I'm surprised Scott Erskine allowed this to take place on this wharf, because that's a very popular fishing spot for young kids. And no one has even said anything about that. I mean, we're talking about the fence. That's a whole nother issue. My question is the size of the police boat or fire boat or whatever we're going to put there, and the size of the dock. It looks like the dock is 3 times larger than the boat. I question whether you need all that wharf space there. And a lot of times, if you're going to rescue someone, and I've been involved in rescues and unfortunately finding people who can't be rescued, we take them to marinas and places where there's ambulance access. That West Wharf is not the place to bring people that need to be lifted on and off. Next thing you know, you're going to be putting a hoist there. So I just think the residents are correct. It's unsightly. And I think the whole idea of what you're doing there is wrong for a public access place to take your grandchildren or your children fishing. So Scott, I'm surprised that you even allowed this fence to go up there. So that's my comment right now. I don't think, I mean, we had a police boat for years down in East River. So all of a sudden, and then we had it on the Dolphins, and now we need a float for it. You could have put a couple more pilings further out in the boat area there. If the boat was aground at low tide, which I find hard to believe because I've never seen any boats on the bottom there. Most of the people there keep their boats year round. I mean, all summer long, and don't worry about their boats bottoming out. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you, Joe.
Right, and next up is James McLean. James, you may need to unmute yourself. James, if you're still on and you wish to talk, you can unmute yourself and do so.
God, he may need instructions on how to do it. I think you have to hit star something.
No, he's on as a,
Okay,
you have to do that with your phone, Tom, because you just dialed in.
got
There
it,
we're on
got
the
it.
screen. All right, we have, James seems to be having a little difficulty, and again, this is not a public hearing. I have one more hand raised, so Ron, we'll let, and it's Jerry Birnbaum, so we'll let Jerry talk, and then might be it. All right, go ahead, Jerry.
Hi, Jerry.
Jerry, if you'd wish to talk, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, he's unmuted. Okay, thanks, Dave.
No problem.
Dave.
Public hearing, I have one more hand raised. so-
Dave.
Yes, we can hear you.
Dave,
Yes, Jerry, your turn to speak.
Gary is
Yeah.
on mute again.
Jerry, you muted yourself again. Yeah.
okay. How's that? We all
Good.
set?
Good.
Okay. So years ago, the town was deeded the wharf, and it was always for offloading and unloading cargo. Funny thing, about 25, 30 years ago, a gate was put up by the town of Madison, blocking access to the wharf at the hotel. They were forced to take that down because of the public access was denied. I'm with Joe Mako. I really feel that the public access is denied here, and I am opposed to this, and I think people should have free access. I mean, at the surf club, all you got to do is crawl under a gate, and you're out there running around, down to West Wharf, East Wharf, surf club, you name it. He can always get access. It doesn't make any difference. But I take this back to the old timers wanting access for all the people in the town of Madison for life. Okay, so I just want to end up with that comment. I'm not opposed to the firemen down there. That's fine and dandy, but I really like to see the young kids, just like Joe Mako says, have access down there to go fishing. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. And Dave, you said there was one other or not?
Oh, that was it.
Okay. So where's the commission stand on this?
Ron, let me
We're on the
interject.
fence.
Ron, I'm going to interject one thing because I think it's important.
Please.
So the coastal site plan was actually first submitted several months ago, and I asked Scott to reroute it through the Beach and Rec Commission and the First Select Woman and Board of Selectmen, because I knew this was going to be a little bit of a policy discussion, which, you know, I don't think necessarily is the Planning and Zoning Commission's role in this application. So I did try to make an effort to see if that could be vetted out prior to, and, you know, I do think there's still some unanswered questions. So one, I wanted to give you that point of information. And number two is just to share with you that, you know, you guys aren't the only decision makers in this process. So if you feel that maybe you need more information from the other decision makers, I think that is an option for you. You know, I'm not suggesting which way to go. I don't know what the right answer is here. I mean, obviously I'll support Scott Erskine in his capacity of, you know, directing his department. I know he's gone through his board and arrived at this solution. But if you guys are feeling uncomfortable with making a decision on this, that's suppose you don't have to tonight, but I'll leave that to you.
And Dave, who would you say the other decision makers are that we would be? partnering
Well,
with?
like I said, so I think it's ultimately Beach and Rec Commission. This is West Wharf Beach and the wharf, and they kind of oversee this area. And then ultimately it's a town property. So the Board of Selectmen have a say in how town property is utilized. And so I think both those bodies, should weigh in on this. And I, to be truthful, I think they have to some extent. I don't know how much additional public input they gathered as part of the process, but they did, I know, weigh in on this particular application before it got to you. So.
If I may just add, something else for the record, when the public was speaking, the location of the dock was predetermined before we got involved by the town. I believe the fire department and Parks and Recs had some discussions on different sites, and this was chosen by those individuals as being the best spot for their needs to service the general public. The second thing is the size of the dock was predetermined by the fire department themselves. Our office didn't randomly just choose a size. There's some discussions about the boat size now and the boat size in the future that they're looking to purchase. Maybe one or there might be two boats there. I don't know. But all those items were predetermined by the town. So there was a wish list and a checklist, which we went through, and now we dotted the I's and crossed the T's to give, the fire department what they exactly needed and Parks and Recs what they exactly needed. And that's kind of what you see here.
Thank you, Mr. Harkins.
Hey,
So-
Ron,
Yes,
do you think there would be any benefit to a site walk and a discussion during a site walk?
it's a good point. What does the commission think about that?
I agree.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah. I would
Anybody
agree.
else?
I think it's a good idea. I think it should be a site walk at high tide.
Okay. So, yes, Jim? Somebody say-
Joel.
Joel, go right ahead.
So just before we go any further, I just want to kind of circle back on a couple things. So one, like John, I almost immediately recognized the safety concern at high tide. And then I want to kind of hit a couple quick things from, factual observation. So I've been to a ton of marinas myself, and not all, but many, I have to pass through a gate to get onto the dock. Either it's a key code or a key that all the boat owners have to get through that gate to get onto the dock. Another thing is that this section of fencing at the end of the dock does not prevent access to the water like fencing off the entire wharf would. There's still access to the water. That's
Right.
it's reduced, but it's not eliminated.
Yep.
And finally, I've been sitting almost where the dock is on the leeward side of West Wharf when the fireboat brought someone in who was badly injured, and the ambulance was there at the West Wharf Beach to take the person in. So you absolutely can bring someone who's very badly injured there. It was you all might remember it. It was the fireworks maybe 10 years ago. I was
yeah.
sitting out there and saw the nature of the man's injuries as they were getting him off the boat and getting him up to the ambulance. So that location absolutely can be used to egress personnel that are critically injured.
Mhm. Thanks, Joel. So is site walk in order? The concurrence with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. So,
Ron,
yes,
so, does that mean in order for the sidewalk, do you want us to reinstall the fencing? So every member of the commission can see what we're doing? Because right now, all it is the posts. We do not have the fencing in place.
I think we can all use our imagination well enough. I don't,
Okay.
I don't,
Okay.
we need
Yeah.
to.
I just don't, I just don't want to go and do something that
No, that's a good,
you people don't want. Because as I said, we had miscalculated last year. And when the tide came up, it tore the one wing off on the beach side. And our intention was to encapsulate when the dock comes up, it is encapsulated, so you just can't step off onto the dock.
right.
And
No,
that's what we're trying to protect the public from getting hurt. And we did have that miscue during the installation process.
Scott, how big are the fence sections?
The fences are 8-foot sections and
I
they're
mean,
5.
Yeah, not to make extra work, but I mean, to me, it would be useful just to see what this fence looks like in person. I haven't been down to see it.
I think Mike, you have pictures of it installed, correct?
Yeah, we saw that.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, they're 5 foot high, and we did black, thinking that they would blend in.
I saw it. I'm just saying, if we're doing site walk,
Yep.
So let me ask you this, Scott, how much did that fence cost to be installed?
You would have to ask that, Mike. Thanks.
Okay. The reason I ask that is if you're going to install those panels again and then potentially have to take them down again, that really doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting you put up the whole fence. I'm just saying
Just bring a panel. Okay.
Just bring a panel and pop it up and then take it.
We can do that.
Okay.
Because the fencing, let's see. We spent 4,300 on the fence, the entire fence.
Okay. Well, that to me would make sense if there was a panel so we could see what it looked like.
Yeah, we can
It would be
certainly
easy
do
enough
that.
to envision where it starts, where it ends, and everything in between.
Yep.
So.
Hey, Ron,
Yes.
would we be able to approve the cameras and signage so that there is some protection down there as part of a partial approval and then do the site walk? I would want to make sure that the fireboat is protected, the public is protected, and at least, I think it sounded like everybody was in concurrence that the cameras made sense and signs made sense.
That's a very good point, Tom. What do the others feel? I mean, at one point we were talking.
Does that do any good for the CAM application to only have it partially approved?
Well, there's two applications that are CAM application, but then there's also the COP, certificate of permission Mike needs to submit to DEP. So I think he'll have to wait until there's a final decision before he can submit that.
Yeah. So just so everybody knows, part of the emergency authorization that after the dock was installed, the COP had to be submitted to DEP, the Office of Long Island Sound. We've had to hold off because all these items about the fence, we were actually in the middle of preparing it. Then we got the call that a fence was installed and there's some items and some issues. So we've talked to both departments at DEP. They're both two separate departments and jurisdictions. The dock is with the COP and the CAM is with another part of DEP agency, and they don't overlap. The only overlap, if I take that fence that we're proposing off of the West Wharf itself and put it on the dock, then it switches jurisdictions. So that's kind of why we're holding off on both of them. The COP, Brian Galambewski, has been aware of the whole situation. We keep him up to date every couple of weeks of what's going on. So he's well aware of the whole thing.
Mike, what's the approval timeline typically from when you submit the COP?
Honestly, it all depends. We've had some COPs that have taken 12 months. But Brian's on this one. He'll approve it almost immediately.
Well, one thing I'd suggest is that you think about just putting this on in 2 weeks, and then you can, so just to keep it moving, and then you can decide whether or not you want to parse out the approval in any way.
Is that acceptable? Mike, Scott?
Yeah, whatever the town tells me to do, I'm working for the town, so I'll be more than happy to aid in any which way.
We did order signs the end of last season that we were going to install on the dock. So people would know to stay off, no jumping, etc. Because we saw that the kids were climbing onto the dock, jumping off, climbing on the boat, jumping off. So in order to protect the town, we were doing the signage so we could take enforcement action if needed. And we were ready to do that, but we wanted permission.
I understand, but some of this liability stuff, there was nothing ever done to prevent kids from jumping off the wharf on the south side, was there? And they do that all the time.
Correct.
So whether they're jumping from the dock is probably safer than jumping from the wharf itself, but
yeah, it is in the ordinances, but it says no jumping from wharves or docks or the mooring posts. So it happens.
It does.
What I would suggest is that also you might want to touch base with town council to find out his take on the liability aspect. I mean, I just go back to if you're driving down a road or I'm designing a road and there's a steep drop off, and I know there's a steep drop off, there's a potential for harm, and I decide not to put in guide rail and somebody drives off, that opens everybody up to liability. In this instance, a barrier was proposed and now a barrier is getting taken away. Where's the liability, with the town on this?
Yeah, I really think the town council ought to be consulted. I think this would be considered an attractive nuisance. It's not like jumping off the wharf into the water. It's jumping off the wharf into a town constructed dock. And in between it is water at high tide and anybody could be crushed. It's attractive nuisance and we ought to get some advice from council. I would say put the fence back up as soon as possible and then think in terms longer term. Can the fence be improved in attraction, or do we just make a decision that signs are good enough for a 5-year-old kid to read? I don't know, but I think we all agree it's sort of a dangerous situation. I'm worried that a site walk 2 weeks, 4th of July weekend, we have nothing there, the best I can tell.
I mean, maybe we can have the CAM application approved with the condition that the fence be looked at further, or an application, when a decision's physically made, a final decision is made on it. I think maybe we put an item in there where it's approved for a certain period of time and that the town would have to come back potentially to the commission at that time.
Ron Bowden said, I think you bring up an excellent point, because here in a couple of weeks on Independence Day weekend, there's going to be, if, assuming that the fireworks go off as planned, there's going to be several hundred people on that wharf. And right now the fence is not there.
So let's get it back up for our site walk so we can see it. It has the benefit of being there to protect people. And then we have time to think about any alternative. But I think if you called our town council, they would be saying, get something up protective. It's protective of people. It's also protective of the town for having removed it and not put it back, in my opinion.
I would agree with that.
Seems to make sense. That logistically makes sense to you, Scott and Mike Harkins?
Yeah, I mean, it's just got, budgeted amount to put it back up as long as he has that money in his Parks and Rec budget, I would say just for the safety aspect, get it up ASAP, and then you can always have further discussion on it, whether it's a different type or a different style. But at least you're making an effort to protect the public.
Yeah.
Is the state going to have a problem with that?
The state doesn't have a problem with it at all because, the dock people, it's outside the coastal jurisdiction line, so they're okay with it. It was just more of a formality that it has to be approved because it is within 100 feet of a coastal resource.
Okay. So Dave, how do you envision we leave this?
Well, be honest with you, I have a little bit mixed feelings about it. One is, I think you have a pretty discrete task of a coastal site plan application if you think it's going to impact coastal resources. So that's really your decision. I think what we're getting drug into is what I was afraid we're getting drug into, is there's a larger town question regarding liability and safety and all these other things, which really isn't our purview.
Right.
So I don't want you guys to assume responsibility for a project that's not under your decision-making authority. So, in some ways, I think if you feel like you look at the coastal site plan implications and you approve the coastal site plan and make a recommendation back to Beach and Rec Commission and the town to follow through on these other issues, that would be one approach. But again, I mixed. I want to be helpful. But this board shouldn't bear all the responsibilities on their shoulders. That's my point.
Okay, any suggestions as to what we want to act upon tonight then? Any members?
I have a question. If we were to make no decision tonight and table this to a future date, could the fence be erected anyway, to Ron's point, to get the fence up for protective reasons until a determination is made?
Is that question for me, John, or who are you directing that question?
Yeah, I guess you, Dave. I don't know who else.
Yeah. I mean, so the fence was already installed at one point, and it was through, complaint to DEP that it was determined that it needed to go through coastal site plan review. So I think you could easily authorize them to reinstall the fence and table a permanent decision on it until a future date. I think that is perfectly fine.
Yep. And I could just bring one point up, but I don't know if it was mentioned, is that the letter from DEP reviewing the CAM application was favorable. DEP doesn't have a problem with it.
Correct.
So that hasn't been read into record yet, but that just came out today, a couple hours before the meeting. Dave had sent that to me down from DEP that it meets all the requirements of their regulations. So DEP basically gave it their blessing.
Would the fence, if you were all approved and set, would the fence remain all year long? It'll be taken down in the winter time.
Mr. Chairman, I would have to leave that up to Scott at Parks and Rec.
I would probably enter it in that we remove it.
Yeah.
After the boat is removed from the water, after all rescue operations are deemed done with all the boating activity on Long Island Sound, which is usually
Well, you're not gonna remove-
late fall.
Yep.
But you're not going to remove the dock, right?
The dock
stays all year long.
No, the dock gets removed after when the fireboat gets pulled from the water. So then it goes down to nothing, and all you would see are the two pilings for the dock, and then the 2-inch by 2-inch or 3-inch by 3-inch posts that would remain up on the dock.
I've witnessed many, many storms that would tear that fence and that dock apart.
Yeah.
Annually.
Yeah. So Ron, can I be useful here for a minute?
Please, Jim.
I'm going to suggest that we just go ahead and do an up or down vote tonight on the application and be done with it.
I'm starting
Well,
to lean that, I'm starting to lean that same way.
two things come to mind. If it's a down, the issues of public safety and so on, which to me are valid points. And it's a down vote. That presents a problem. What I was thinking about, and Dave, you might want to comment on this. Could we, for example, prove it for 1 year, for example, or until May 1st? And that way it could get through this season. The public would be protected. The things that Ron Bodenson brought up, recognized. And then over the course of the next 8 or 10 months, have Beach and Rec and the fire department work on alternative solutions, whether it be plexiglass or some other way of protecting the dock and the boats without being as visually obtrusive. And then revisit it in the spring of next year, about the time or close to the time would be going back up and erected. Is that?
Yeah, no, I think you could do that. I think it's just going to be, someone's going to have to track to make sure that temporary approval gets revisited at some point.
My suggestion would, Ron, I'm sorry, Ron.
No, go right ahead, Tom.
My only suggestion would be, let's not get into temporary approval and if this, then that. I'm okay voting to approve, honestly, and just let the selectmen deal with the fallout if the public doesn't like the aesthetics. They got us into this situation. They can deal with the fallout. We then are taking the step to allow the town to reduce liability.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning the same way you are, Tom, and honing in on what Dave said is we're getting really distracted beyond taking the CAM application on its face. And I think to your point, I'd be inclined to look at the application on its basic merits and get away from the stuff that's someone else's responsibility.
If I could pipe in, I think Joel's previous statement about several hundred people being on the wharf on the 4th of July is a very prescient comment. And I think Tom's notion of let's kick this can back is also, in case there's public fallout, is also a prescient thought. So I would be willing to, on its face, vote in favor of it right now.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Anybody else who's remained silent? Elliot, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts? And you're on mute.
I pretty much agree with Joel, and Tom. I think we should take a look at it on its face and go ahead and approve it.
Okay. Anyone else want to have anything to add? Well, then I think we can still discuss it. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Joe. Second by Joel Miller. Okay, so we have a motion to approve the application. Is there any other discussion? We've certainly spent enough time on it, but it's time for more if you so desire. Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor of approval signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Unanimous. Thank you, Mr. Harkins. Thank you, Mr. Erskine.
Thank you, guys. You guys have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thanks, guys.
The only downside of this is it would have been nice to have a commission picnic at the beach for a site visit, but
We can still do that.
That's later. That's later.
We can still
That's
do that.
later.
we can get
Don't
on
we-
and inspect
Don't
it.
we have an occasion coming up?
We may very well. We may very well. I don't have anything definite just yet, but I think we will. Last on the agenda is application 21-03 plus CSP at 856 Boston Post Road, map 39, lot 8 in the R2 district. The owner is Faith Whitehead. The applicant is 856 Boston Post Road LLC. And it's a special exception permit application to construct a single-family residential cluster development and associated site improvements along with a coastal site plan review. This hearing began on March 18th, was continued on May 26th, and we are continuing tonight for a meeting on June 3rd. The public hearing has been closed, which means we cannot take any more input from either the public or the applicant or the intervener, nor can we ask them any questions. The only people we can communicate with is ourselves, staff, Dave Anderson, and I understand if a legal question comes up that we may be able to access Peter Gelderman, our town attorney, tonight. But this is where we're at. And I gave some thought about how to begin, and I thought that if I was like any of the others that are on the commission, we got an awful lot of information from both parties, a lot of testimony, and I think we're all, at least I am interested in trying to get a little wrap on what we see are the significant issues, and also seeing where the other commissioners lie on some of these issues, getting their insight, and kind of evolve toward reaching our own personal decisions. For those of us who hopefully have not made up your minds yet, one way or the other, we want to get the input of everyone. And then come to a conclusion and base that conclusion on a set of standards, if you will, points, reasons that to defend why we reach this decision, whether it be one way or the other. Does that make sense? Crawl before we walk a little bit. So with that, I'll just open it up. Does anybody want to give their opinion or thoughts about the major issues before us? And what is the significance and what we should be talking about and considering tonight? Anyone?
I'll start.
Okay, Joe, thanks.
You're welcome. This may not be the majority of the think tank here, but having walked the property, having driven by it, having participated in all of the meetings except for one, which I did watch online, and read every document that Dave sent out. I think there was a lot of throwing of sand back and forth. However, I don't see any clear indication at all that this application goes, granted it's a special exception permit application, which is allowed in that district. And I don't see in any way, shape, or form how it does not conform. In fact, I think it makes it, with the modifications to current structures on the property, I see it becoming more conforming. I know that's not the thought of the majority of the public. I'm just strictly talking about our rules. So I think taking all opinion out of it and feelings out of it, and just going on the merits of the application, I don't see the need to continue on this. I'm ready to vote on it right now.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Mathers. It's on mute, John. You're
Thank you. Yeah, a few things that go through my mind. First of all, I agree with Joe. This is, that this is not a popularity contest. We can't go with making a decision here based on who's got the largest number of signs in town or what the popular opinion may be. I guess my question is is it legal? There was a question raised whether it is legal, whether it's too dense. And I would like to revisit that tonight. Maybe Dave, you can address that. Are all the concerns within our purview? I have great concerns about the septic and the runoff, but we are not the health department. We are the P&Z, and that's really outside of our purview. Does it do harm to the neighbors? That's another thing that's does it? It's certainly perceived to by a lot of the neighbors, but does it do harm to the neighbors? So I'd like to have more discussion on those topics tonight. Is it legal? Is it within our purview? Does it do harm?
Okay. Dave, mark that down. We'll go around the room a little bit and see what other issues and questions people have. Thanks, John. Anyone else? Jim?
Okay, I think that just looking at our regulations for this type of zone, the applicant has been able to make it fit just with the parameters that are set with this. There is one area that I'm concerned about, and why I will vote probably against it, is that I do believe that it does bring harm to that area. One of the things that we look at under section granting or denying special exceptions is 4.4.2 or 4.4.4b, which has to do with the appropriate use of neighboring property, and that it will not be substantially or permanently injured. I think that view of whether it will be, that neighborhood will be permanently injured, really is in the minds of the people that are in the neighborhood. And those folks have spoken very clearly about it. I personally am against, and that's why I brought it up as a question to the applicant at the last meeting, of the possibility of proceeding with the application and not putting up that structure on the front, which to me destroys that look of that area that has been there for a long time. I think it's just not right. I don't think it's appropriate. And, I can't speak to, the septic issues and all of those other things. I'm not really going to speak about the blasting because that's not also in our purview, really. But it really does have to do, because this is a special exception. It is not by right, even though it fits the parameters. I'm against it for that specific reason, and that's why I will vote against it.
Thank you, John. Anyone else?
Ron?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess I've heard a couple things here that really piqued my interest. I had the same issue that Jim does on the carriage house itself, and I'm struggling with that because I also happen to believe in general the merits of the application have been met. Our regs have been fulfilled. But, we do have that section, as Jim mentioned, that we can talk about the neighbor and the harm that it might be bringing onto them. And I'd like to hear everybody else's view on that, because I am struggling with the carriage house in particular. I have from day one. The issues of septic, of blasting. We've got health officials and experts who can weigh in on how well that's done, how well it's being handled, et cetera. We've got town officials that do that. I don't think that's our purview, but I'd like the benefit of some other people as well, thinking about, the carriage house.
Right. Okay, thank you, Peter. Next. Elliot.
I agree with John regarding the septic. That was one of my first concerns that I had with the project, and but we have a health department that will obviously have to deal with that. The other issue that I've had that I've struggled with is also the gatehouse, or the I think they call it the gateway house or gatehouse, the one at the bottom of the hill. Section K of our regulation says that the site layout should be oriented to promote a sense of community. I think the 3 buildings at the top definitely have that sense of community with the shared area in the middle, and the gatehouse at the bottom of the hill with a sidewalk going up to that portion of the property doesn't, to me, really give a sense of community, that it's part of that community. And that's basically the main part that I'm struggling with.
Thank you, Elliot. Anyone else want to volunteer or I'll call on someone? Giselle?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with Joel, who spoke first. Just keeping focus on what we should be voting on in our concentration, just the fact that it's simply a special exception. I see that what the application covers, it does conform with the special exception. I too struggled with that gatehouse as well. I think someone even during the public hearing asked, could it just be removed? If anything, it doesn't give that sense of community. But, everything else with the blasting, that's something that the blasting company, I've experienced blasting. My next door neighbor, did it. They put a pool in. I was very comfortable with the way they proceeded and what they do beforehand, the inspections. You are covered. I don't know if that's the same outcome for the homeowner side of the ledges, but once again, I don't know. I don't think that's in our purview. So if I just focus on the fact that the application is in line with the special exception, I too am prepared to give my vote as well.
Thank you, Giselle. Anyone else?
Yeah, just really quickly, just to Giselle's point, Giselle, I would say though that my view, my position on it is in our purview. It is a part of the things that we must look at. And so my opinion is not outside of our purview. It is in the purview. And I think that's the reason I am against it.
Thanks, Jim. Joel?
Hey, Rob. Thanks. So, with everything, we've seen it tonight. I try to circle back to what is the face of the application? What's the basis of the application? And does the application meet the requirements in order to warrant approval under special exception? And like a couple of the speakers, I think that the applicant has checked those boxes to conform with the special exception permit. There's a couple of things I do tend to agree with Ellie. I had heard a lot of arguments about the gatehouse, the configuration, for instance, or its orientation, which I didn't really find to be that much out of line. If you look at the orientation of the gatehouse and you look at the structure behind it, what would be considered the front door of the main building is actually in what I think your eye would tell you is the rear of the building. So technically, if you're standing on Birnbaum Lane, you're looking at the back of the house. So the gatehouse with its garage facing forward isn't any more awkward than the original house whose back is to everybody. The front door faces the direction of the sound, but the concept of community, where our regs for these small cluster developments are supposed to promote that sense of community in the buildings there, should contribute to that. I do find some merit in that that point that Elliot brought up. The blasting, I think the applicant brought up a good point about the blasting. Whether it's in our purview or not, the point that was made in the last iteration of the public hearing was that absent from all of the additional third-party analyses was the house itself, which is the centerpiece of the development, which the developer and its team has a vested interest in protecting that structure and limiting the impact of the blast such that the centerpiece of its own development isn't damaged, as well as the properties around it. And in a lot of cases, it's the ledge's house itself is closest to the blasting. And then as just kind of a side point, and Joey kind of brought this up maybe a little more softly or tactfully, but what I can continue to see as a trend with a lot of our applications that we see that have a lot of contention built in is that there's this common denominator of tactics that are wrought with conjecture and hyperbole and misinformation, disinformation, even some misrepresentation. And it's troubling to me. I think that there's often a common denominator there, and we get into conduct that's probably more suitable for cable news than a community like ours. I don't think the tactics really belong in our community. It's bullying, frankly, to try and bully public opinion, to bully our own panel here, our own commission, and we're just volunteers from the community trying to do the right thing, to be hit with all kinds of misinformation and disinformation, and then from another angle to be threatened with lawsuits is it's not really welcome. I've spent a good part of my life protecting people's individual rights for expression, and so certainly that's within someone's right. It's just not welcome to me, and I don't think bullying has any kind of place anywhere. It's a shame that we start to see this more and more these days in our own applications that we review, and I say it's a shame because it's shamelessly shameful. And I really wouldn't think that would have a place in our community or in these proceedings. Luckily, I would say that kind of behavior would undermine, it's so off-putting that it would undermine the legitimate agenda of concerned parties. Luckily, enough concerned parties could speak respectfully, not only of the applicant, this commission, and of themselves, that their voices could be heard and duly considered. It's probably enough to say about that.
Thank you, Joel.
Ron, I just want to bring to your attention. So Carol has her hand raised, and Carol, I don't believe that you or Ron Bodenson are participating in the deliberation. So I think you're just here for this point, just to observe. Is that right, Ron?
Yeah.
Okay.
The unseated are not allowed to participate in the discussion or obviously in the vote. Tom Berland, have we heard from you?
No, you haven't, Ron. So and thank you. So I struggled with this one and really kind of weighed in and really had to think hard about what our purview is and really what it's not. And there are some areas of concern that I've got that I just don't think are in our purview, i.e. the septic system. And we have to trust the experts on that. I do think when we take a look at the application, I mean, there were only a few locations that this type of community that we came up with a regulation for actually fit. And so if not here, where? And I do believe after doing the site walk, after looking at the at the designs, that it goes a long way to meeting what our vision was of having a cluster community in the downtown area. I honestly don't have a problem with the carriage house. I think that there's not one type of house down in that particular area. There are varying styles, and so I just don't think that after a year, 2 years, 3 years, people would really say, well, that doesn't belong here. Much the same as they don't say that that barn that's in the neighbor's property that's pretty close to this property, would they say that that doesn't belong either? I think the one thing that I remain concerned about is the water service. And I don't really know whether that's in our purview or not. Obviously, this is a historic delivery of water to 2 adjacent properties. There is construction work that could disrupt that. Obviously, water service to a home is vital. So I think to the degree that we can put protections in to ensure that there is an uninterrupted supply of water to the neighbors, in that whatever agreement needs to be put into place there is there. I am comfortable with it because I think it solves it. It addresses the vision that we had with this regulation.
Thank you, Tom. Before I speak, John, did any of those comments answer your questions? You had 2. I think we should.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Jim. When we talk about this project substantially injuring or harming the neighbors, how obviously the neighbors it's not a popular project with the neighbors. They're not fond of it. They don't like it. I don't think that we can make our decision based on what they like. The carriage house, I don't have a problem with the carriage house or the gatehouse. I think it's kind of a neat thing. I really don't have problems with it, but I'd be interested to know is how this project substantially injures or harms the neighbors, because that's a concern.
Yeah, okay, so I guess the first thing I would speak to is value. And I'm not talking necessarily about monetary value. I'm speaking about the value of the neighbors having essentially tranquility and maybe the view of their surroundings. I think that this harms that. Particularly the houses in the front. I think the homes that are in the back part of the property, their issues really, some of it does have to do with the view and all of that kind of thing. I know they have concerns about the water. Some of them, they have concerns, primarily about that. So that's my view about the harm. I think also from the standpoint of the public, that current vista down through there, Birnbaum Lane to the right with the open space, that is going to change permanently with that gatehouse being plopped there. In what my view, it's kind of a funny orientation, but I think that's the primary issue that I have. Peace and tranquility and areas like that.
How about, there's a couple of mentioned a sense of community. When we think about a project like this, does sense of community mean a sense of community within the project? Or is it a sense of community that incorporates the project, the way the project fits into its surrounding community? What are we talking about when we talking about sense of community?
John, I'll take a crack at, and I'm not saying that this is an answer, but I'll give you my input on that question, which was when I drafted that regulation, it was drafted to foster a sense of community within the proposed development. That was the thought behind that. I mean, you could interpret it to mean other things as well, but that was really the idea, was that people didn't simply, drive to their unit, park in their garage, and not interact with anyone beyond that. So that was the purpose initially.
Thank you.
And that was not my issue, John, was not that from the sense of community. It was really the view of value by the neighbors, and also to me personally, the value of having that space open the way it has been on Birnbaum Lane. When we did the first one of these, which was the general's residence, as you know, there was a lot of input from the neighbors. So they were involved from a community aspect, and I think things got worked out where they supported it. That has not been the case here. Also, I just want to make a comment going back to Joel's comments about the language and so forth, the hyperbole. I think that to me, there was some of that on both sides. I was offended by some of the applicants' retort to some of the letters that were received by us. Certainly some of it is warranted because the applicant can go through and address those. But in some cases, there was an element of disrespect. It's not the reason for denying the application, but I feel that there was some of that on both sides, and I too was offended with some of the misinformation that was brought forward.
Thank you, Jim. I've looked at this, like I think all of us, from so many different perspectives, and a lot of the boxes were checked. Certainly, it's consistent on its face with the plan of conservation and development. It's consistent with our zoning regulations. The concerns at the rear of the property with inland wetlands and runoff pass muster with them. Some of the arguments, for example, about even fertilizer. Right now, it's a vast lawn area today with no restriction on what can be done in terms of fertilization and so forth. If a change was made, there's a chance to manage that. It's obviously a change in the heart and soul of Madison. But the one direction we haven't looked in the heart and soul of Madison, and this certainly in it, is look across the street. I don't think there's anybody who isn't proud of what used to be residences on all of those properties, virtually all of them. Now there are banks and restaurants and School of Music and so forth. I don't see any reason in the world those values would be affected over that transition that's occurred over many, many years, certainly long before our time, even my time. Things, as Tom Berlin pointed out, like the water service, concerned about that? Yes. Thinking it can be resolved? Absolutely. I mean, first off, it's a public utility that is responsible for providing it. And that could easily be addressed through a condition if it was approved to ensure that wouldn't be corrupted. I think as far as blasting is concerned, the applicant gave a compelling explanation of, although not 100% safe, it can be done safely. And that, I think, was compelling information, in spite of what the information we received from the intervener. The gatehouse, I'm not sure. Well, let me put also into perspective. We have a property now with really two buildings on it. And we're looking at the rear of putting in really one additional building, taking the one that's on the property line down and building two further to the north, further away from the abutters on that side. Larger, yes, but certainly well distant from where that building that's there today is. The gatehouse, truthfully, I was convinced by ACA, when I first saw the original submission, and it was oriented facing the street, it was oriented perpendicular to the street. I thought that was odd. It should be facing the street. And then watching ACA work its way through it, if that is approved, I think that's, a better orientation for a variety of reasons. But I'm still not sure as to how appropriate it is, in spite of the fact that there was some testimony given by John Matthews that originally possibly the town hall was located right on that site, on that lawn. And that was substantiated to a degree by some very rudimentary information that was submitted by the Historical Society that didn't give any real detail, but it pretty much explained that there was at one time a building on that front lawn. Not that there has to be one now, but it was an interesting point. I wish we had more from the Historical Society to work with, but what they gave us is what we had. So, that change is sometimes difficult, but change for the right reasons and consistent with regulations makes sense. And I also think that if this were to be approved, and I don't know how we'll end up voting, but certainly conditions could be placed on the approval to take into account, just as one example, of the water. Secondly, the fertilization and landscaping and those types of things. Even maybe the relocation of that garden where there was that garden in the back, community garden, might be placed somewhere else on the property that doesn't affect or isn't as close to the wetlands. So that's kind of where I'm at at the moment, but that's still looking for more thoughts and comments from the commission before ultimately making a decision about an approval or a modified approval. So I hope that makes sense. Anybody else have a comment, a thought, a question? Dave, at this point, I'm going to make sure we do this the right way. Should we take what equates to a straw vote and then work on, for example, some of the variables that we've seen to the reasons why we've reached this conclusion, and possibly put up till next time conditions if that's necessary?
That's completely up to you. I mean, I think there was a couple of questions that were hanging out there that maybe are worth continuing to discuss, just to make sure that folks feel they've had adequate time to consider them. And so John did ask a question about density, about whether the project meets the density requirements in the regulations. And the applicant has submitted information to the record based on a topographical survey that they conducted, that it does meet the density requirements. So, based on the information provided to the record, I believe it does. And I think I would like to share, I try not to share too much because I don't think, I'm not voting. And so my opinion doesn't necessarily matter, but, I know that folks have talked about septic systems. And I think, I'll say, I think Dave Skelly gave a compelling presentation about his concerns about septic systems. And I think, they were very valid. I do, however, agree with some of the statements that were made today, is that septic systems are regulated, in this case, by our local health department, and they're derived from state law. And so this commission really doesn't have a lot of oversight into that process. One thing I thought about as Dave Skelly was talking, this whole process and the regulation that allows for cluster housing was recommended in the 2013 Plan of Conservation and Development. And so that led to this. Also recommended in that 2013 Plan of Conservation and Development was to fund a comprehensive wastewater study for the Water Pollution and Control Authority, which is another town board. And the Water Pollution Control Authority ultimately has the ability to establish wastewater management districts. So if they find areas of town that they feel that utilizing on-site septic systems potentially promote environmental concerns, they could actually create higher standards, higher and stricter requirements than the public health code requires. And so the WPCA has asked year after year for funding from the town to do that comprehensive wastewater study. And just this past budget cycle was successful in getting that funding. So from 2013, where the recommendation was made, until today, it was, that much time has passed. So, kind of similar to what I said in the previous application, this commission doesn't bear responsibility for all, and so, well, you might agree that, septic systems are a concern in certain areas of town. I don't necessarily think the responsibility for that rests entirely on your shoulders. And so I just wanted to share that information with you, just to agree that it's regulated by the local health department, and to share that there are other mechanisms in place that the town could pursue to regulate septic systems a little differently. So.
Thanks, Dave. Does anybody have anything else they want to share at this point? Or a question they want answered at this point? I thought for a minute that was your arm going up, Joe, but it went too far. It went way behind your back.
Sorry.
That's okay. So, well, why don't I start? Looking for a good starting point on strawing this thing. There are some who have expressed opposition to it, and others who have expressed support for it, but with a couple of configurations, two configurations, gatehouse or no gatehouse. So perhaps the best way to put it, and I'd be open to, if you disagree with me, to hear that, is to maybe ask a question, go around the table. Who supports it? Who? I'm thinking about the gatehouse now, the gateway question. Who is in support of the application taking the gatehouse out of consideration? In other words, for the moment, for looking at it with that view, if the gatehouse was not involved, would you be in favor of supporting the application, or would you support the application on an approval?
Hey, so Ron, I think I was the only one that was quite specific in terms of how I would vote on this application.
Right.
So if I may go first.
Sure.
So I would be in favor of the application without that gatehouse. And one of the things that it would do, one, it would remove my biggest objection, which is, well, you heard me what I said there.
Yeah.
The thing is, even though we don't deal with septic, it would be one less unit and more area for septic to handle the rest of the the other units that would be up on the hill.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jim. Anyone else like to volunteer? Joe?
Yeah, I will. I do have one question though, and it's my question is, can somebody refresh my memory specifically about the discussion that was had about blasting up the driveway to install a new water service? And I don't recall whether that was strictly to benefit the new construction of the main house and the additional houses. And that was to leave, and the project would leave the existing plumbing alone to the southern houses, or whether at some point the southern houses were to be cut over and use the new plumbing. I don't remember what that discussion was in great detail. Does anybody have any recollection of that?
Joey, what I recall, and I was going to make this comment to Tom when he was talking about uninterruptible service, and
That's exactly why I'm asking that question.
yeah. So the way I've got it in my notes, and I welcome being corrected, is that the new main would come up and serve the development, and then it would bring that main up to a point where the existing I don't know what the right word is for, the easements down to the other houses would maintain its existing piping, but the new main would bring it up to a particular point where that connection can be made. But with that, I can't imagine any possible way to guarantee uninterruptible water service when you have to cut a new main in. And even if you were to I don't know, bring tanker trucks or something, you still have to cut that in, right? So I can't imagine any way of having completely uninterruptible service. But now I'm going off on a tangent. But I think it was the new main coming up to a point where the other houses would connect to.
Okay, I
think my concern was there wasn't an approved plan by the Connecticut Water Company that has a responsibility for serving that. So that was the only thing I wanted to make sure that was in place before construction, is that there is an approved plan, in that the applicant bears responsibility for making sure that exists.
To that point, I also recall a presentation, perhaps by Mr. Ott, that could have possibly stated the Connecticut Water Company doesn't do that. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think the engineers do that, and then they call the Connecticut Water Company and they make it happen. I don't think, I kind of remember part of that presentation. Again, I think by Mr. Ott, that said, we have engineered this. I also kind of remember that there were going to be two mains, and the new property was not going to be utilizing the existing main, leaving the homeowners on the old main with actually more water capacity than they had in the past. I think that's what I remember. But to Joel's point,
Well, excuse me, Joe, if you'd like, I can pull up Mike Ott submitted summary comments, the most recent summary comments, which do speak a little bit to this issue. So rather than relying on our memories, if I can pull up those summary points,
Okay.
you can see if they're helpful at all.
well, while you're doing that, I'll just finish my thought. The whole reason I addressed that was before somebody or collectively we agree to put in a provision saying if this was to be approved, that we would put in a provision saying the existing people would not be affected. Well, everybody on the street and in a specific radius would likely be affected if they had to cut into a main. That's just a normal course, I would imagine, of any construction project where you're tapping into a public utility. So that was only my thought. But to answer your question, Ron, what are my thoughts on it? I concur with some of the other commissioners in my thought that I don't necessarily have a problem with the gatehouse. The design as shown to me seems very becoming. And I would be willing to listen to and entertain and perhaps agree with any other provisions that other commissioners put in, so long as uninterrupted water isn't one of them. I do trust the engineers in their thought, in their statements that they would take the utmost care to not disrupt the neighbor's water, and they would, and the easements would remain, and they would still be granted their water access. I can't imagine any engineer or business person would falsify that information, and so that is my thought on that.
Yeah, and so Joe and Joel, just to correct myself, my intent in that comment was not to say there wouldn't be a moment in time that they wouldn't have water. That's going to happen in construction. But if you blast and you crack a water main, they could be out for a week while that gets replaced. You can put temporary water mains in. They do it all the time. My concern is to make sure that whatever agreements need to be done with the Connecticut Water Company be put into place prior to shoveling ground before construction starts. And I'm, honestly, where you've got neighbors who've got water concerned, I'm not willing to trust that people will just do the right thing. I think we have a known issue where we know the water main goes through this property in the area that there's going to be construction. I think it's incumbent upon us to put assurances in place that the people who get water from that main, it will exist. And having that as part of our approval process is just due diligence on our part to ensure that. And that was my intent for doing, for saying and putting that forward.
I have a thought too, but Dave, do you have the information you wanted to share with us yet?
Yeah, do you see it on the screen?
Yeah, I think line item 5 talks.
Yeah, so if you read number 5, Mike in his bullet says, he explained in our verbal testimony before the commission, and this is where it suggests we would then maybe start a condition if you're going to suggest a condition. The owner of the project will be responsible to maintain water service to the adjacent and in vicinity properties, and will be responsible for all costs associated with the final water facilities plan. Then you might want to add some language that, such plan shall be in place prior to the commencement of any construction activities.
I think that's perfect. Tom,
With
does
that,
that
I'm fine.
satisfy you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Hey, real quick, can you guys see me and hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
My screens have all gone blank. I can't see anything. So I'm going to real quick log out and log back in.
Okay.
Well, why don't we give Joel
Yeah.
a minute and wait for him to come back?
Oh, I just saw you.
Yeah, I see Joel.
And I just realized how prominent it is that there's a bed behind me. Please don't anybody think I'm in my bedroom.
Are you?
I'm on a business trip. I'm in the downtown Hilton in Boston.
That's what I thought. I thought you were in a hotel room.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you were in a Hilton. I'm glad I didn't even have to ask. I'm glad you
Of
were.
course I'm in a Hilton, John.
That's funny. Well, we could see Joel a moment ago.
And John, just so you know, when I travel, it's always to a Hilton.
Maybe if I text him. I just texted him and suggested maybe that you could call in from his phone, audio only.
Joel was faced with Microsoft's forcing updates on him upon shutdown, but he has another computer that he's logging into right now.
Oh, good. I was just going to ask you if you had any technical insight. Not only that, you have the answer.
Yeah.
And you're all the way in Boston.
I know.
While we're waiting, John, how's the hotel business these days? Busy? Back up to speed?
Yes, it's
Good.
this is a recovery year. We have vaccinationers staying with us, and demand is very strong. Yeah,
Good.
hotel, restaurant, weddings. Yeah, a little different in Boston. I don't think Joe had a hard time finding a room in Boston.
No,
We have
no.
we have three hotels up in that market that are in our company, and they're struggling. But our two Connecticut properties are doing well because they're more leisure oriented.
This is a fairly large hotel that I stay in often, and it's like there's nobody here. I'm shocked.
Is it Back Bay?
I'm in Chinatown. I'm in downtown South
Oh yeah,
Boston.
yeah, I know the hotel.
It's a double tree.
Boston is doing as poorly as any city in the country right now.
And what do you attribute that to, John? I know that's not easy to answer, but
Well, I think Boston's a city that's been a destination for citywide conferences. They've been their bread and butter, a lot of business travel. I don't know what the status of all the colleges and universities are in Boston. I've been pretty focused on trying to keep my head above water here in Madison with the labor shortage that we face on top of the demand that we're in. We feel so.
this is frustrating. We can't continue without a full complement at this particular moment.
He did
John,
say,
did you say you could use a busboy?
Sure.
No age restrictions, right?
You got to be 17, Ron.
Or Converse 71 is okay, right?
Yeah, sure.
He has an opening for a Williams College graduate.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's maybe a demerit.
So John, I can do Tom and Joe a little bit better. I only stay at the Curio Collection.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Joe, would you be able to check in with Joel and see if he's if is there anything I can do to assist him if he needs me to send him anything?
yes.
Can't we just text them the dial-in number? And access codes? And then he can catch up on the video in a little bit.
He's not answering, so he's probably frustrated. But what's this new icon on the screen? It looks like somebody may have come on audio.
203 645 0602.
No, that's not him.
That's me.
Tom, I think.
Who's me?
That's Tom. Tom.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. I recognize the number now. We dealt with that a little
I
earlier.
was having PC problems myself.
I just texted him telling him.
Oh, here he comes.
Okay.
All right. There he goes.
Keep our fingers crossed.
Back in action, Joel?
I am.
You have to say something
Welcome back.
extremely profound now, so.
Okay. To continue, we're on the discussion of water, I believe. And who is speaking?
Yeah, so it was a community discussion, and I think we all, those that were involved, agreed that we would include the text of line item 5 on Mr. Ott's summary points. And Dave, what was the additional language you suggested?
I suggested such plan, referring to the final water facilities plan. Such plan shall be in place prior to the start of any construction activity.
I think, I was thinking about it during the break, and disrupted is one thing, and that's understandable. I mean, we can be disrupted for flushing of the mains and those types of things as well. But I think what we were worried about longer term was water service being denied because of problems created by this. And I do think it's important. And I suggest that, just having a plan in place is one thing, but making sure that the plan works. And I have every faith in the water company, but nonetheless, that we could further condition it if we wanted to with, no permit until the plan is in place, and no CO until it's completed, and those for any of the units until that is up and running, so to speak, if that's still a concern with anyone. If that makes any sense, what do you think of that idea, that approach?
Well, I think in Mike Ott's note, he mentioned that Connecticut Water Company won't sign off on any plan until the permits are in place. I think that's
Correct.
what I saw on there.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm comfortable with what Dave suggested in terms of additional language.
Okay, well, let's proceed. We got off the track just slightly with the water. in terms of our thoughts on a vote to approve. We had a couple talk about, with the gatehouse. Let's continue. Who hasn't spoken yet?
So is the question with or without the gatehouse? That we
Well,
were,
I think we're going to have to refine that. I think the question at the moment is who is in favor of an approval in general terms, and then we can talk about the gatehouse. Is
So
that
I think we sort of morphed into that. I mean, I'm in favor of approval with just the consideration of the additional language for the water to the additional homes.
okay?
As am I.
As is Tom. Okay.
Yep.
Elliot?
I would be more inclined to approve the project without the gatehouse. Not saying I wouldn't approve it
Right.
with it in place, but I'd be more inclined to be in favor of it with the gatehouse not being in the project.
Okay. Jim, it may be redundant, but I assume you spoke your piece. You tend to be in favor of it without the gatehouse. Is that correct? Jim?
I'm trying to unmute, Ron. For some reason, it takes a while. You're correct.
Okay. Giselle?
Yeah, I would be more in favor of the application without the gatehouse as well. But would still approve it with the gatehouse.
Got it. Peter Roos?
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, the gatehouse was my issue. I think it's checked all the other boxes. And as we've been sitting here, I had a chance to sort of listen to everybody's comments. And I also went back and looked at some of my notes from the ACA hearings that they had on it. And I think they did do some things to make it more appealing, I should say. And so I guess I can probably go either way on this one. I mean, I think in general, I'm very supportive of the project. If we all chose to do it without the gatehouse, I'd be fine with it. But ultimately, I think ACA has good wisdom. And if we need to do it with the gatehouse, I'd be willing to support that as well.
Okay. And I'll loop around again to John Mathers. So John, maybe you spoke, but I'm getting a little
No,
far.
actually, I haven't. I really struggle with this project. I want to like it, but I'm having a hard time getting over the impact it's having on the neighborhood, on the character of the neighborhood. I think Jim spoke some wisdom on the how it may impact value in the neighborhood. I'm not so swayed by whether the neighbors like the design of the positioning of the gatehouse or whatnot, but I think about the fact that the current situation is probably 5 or 6 cars go up and down that driveway. We're going to change that to 10 to 14 cars that go up and down that driveway and go up and down Birnbaum Lane and spill onto East Wharf Road, right where the general's residence is going to be, adding congestion there as well. I think it does have an impact on the peace and tranquility of a neighborhood where people walk their dogs and stroll. And I'm just having a hard time getting over that. So I think that I would be inclined to not vote in favor of this project.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts?
I have one more about the gatehouse. It's not so much the design of it or the appearance of it. For my vantage point, it has to do more with the language in that section K, just regarding the dwelling units within the development should be oriented to promote the sense of community. And I just feel that, the gatehouse being down at the bottom of the hill, not really up part of the community itself, up on top of the ledge, just really makes it not really seem like it's part of the community. And that's my version of it, more so than the appearance of it or what ACA has, the changes that they've made to the appearance of it.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought or a comment?
So Ron, I'm inclined to grant approval to the application. The gatehouse, I know there's a lot of discussion about that. And I totally understand Elliot's point about the sense of community. But it's really not all the way down the hill. It's just down the hill from the main house. It's not like it's all the way out sitting on the edge of Birnbaum Lane. So while it doesn't necessarily have that visual line of sight to the buildings in the back, it's not, it's not a 10-minute walk to go from that building to the garden area. So while there's not maybe that visual connection, for that sense of community within the development, as distances go, I think it still meets the intent.
Okay, thank you, Joel.
As far as the appearance of it, I'll put some weight behind the experts that sit on ACA and what recommendations they make to us.
Thank you, Joel. Any other hands, thoughts? I think that, John, in response to your question about traffic, personally, I don't feel that is an issue. Certainly, there isn't anything in the record that indicates it. And living in a community with 31 homes all fed off one driveway, there's absolutely never been a problem or a backup or a traffic problem created by it. And I don't think incrementally, yes, there'll be a few more trips, but I don't, in my own mind, see that as being impactful or worthy of my, looking at it and hanging my hat on that. But I still respect what you're saying.
I'm not hung up on a traffic issue, Ron, as much as I'm thinking about the character of the existing neighborhood. We're talking about a sense of community, within the development itself. I'm thinking about the sense of community of that neighborhood, of that block, so to speak. And that's one thing that I think impacts the peace and tranquility, perhaps, to use Jim's words, of that neighborhood. So I'm not imagining a backup of cars sustained basis.
I see. Okay, thank you. So if anybody doesn't have anything else, I would, at this point, entertain a motion.
Ron,
Dave?
Before you do that, I do think there was a few other things to discuss based on the last meeting. So number one, I'm going to share my screen. So the applicant had submitted some proposed conditions of approval if the commission went in that direction. So I think the commission, we should review those. We already talked about one addition. Another thing that was discussed, the Scranton Memorial Library asked that they be included in the pre-blast survey. So I think should be some discussion around that and whether or not the commission would like to include a condition requiring that they be included. And then Ron, you brought up a question about fertilization and the community garden. So there's a few items to revisit before you start entertaining a motion.
Okay, well, I was in my own head going to talk about conditions afterwards, but that's probably, you're doing it the right way as well. I think that's important. So why don't we just generally list the conditions that the developer has provided us with?
So I'll offer to read them. It's a little bit difficult to read, so I'll read through them if you just be patient with me. So potential conditions of approval, this is again in the record. It was provided by the applicant. Blasting, All blasting at the site shall be done in accordance with that certain report prepared by Richard M. Hosley Jr., President of Realty Securities Incorporated, and entitled "A Focus on the Execution and Impact of Blasting Relative to Wetlands and Adjacent Structures for the Ledges of Madison, Connecticut," summary of March 2021. Inland Wetlands and Planning and Zoning presentation to serve as a reference for rock blasting, which report has been filed and is part of the record in this matter and is referred to herein as the Hosley Guidelines. All contracts and subcontractors for blasting operations at the site shall contain a provision that obligates the contractors and subcontractors to comply with the guidelines, the Hosley Guidelines. All applications for a blasting permit for the site shall contain 1, a copy of the Hosley Guidelines, and 2, a written certification by the applicant to the fire marshal that the application, all supporting materials, and the blasting operations to be conducted are and will be compliant with the Hosley Guidelines. Within 30 days of approval of the special exception, the applicant shall file or cause to be filed a notice to the fire marshal informing the fire marshal that any blasting permit issued for the site must comply with this condition number 1. Upon the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for any of the proposed 7 units, the property owner and/or homeowners association, as applicable, shall comply with the general site operation and maintenance plan, Appendix E, to the stormwater management design report prepared by Michael Ott of Summerhill Engineers and Land Surveyors, PC, dated April 1st, 2021, which report has been filed and is part of the record in this matter. This condition shall be binding upon the property owner, her heirs, successors, and/or assigns, and shall be included in any applicable homeowners association rules and regulations, and any covenants, conditions, and restrictions to the proposed development. Number 3, the property owner and/or homeowners association, as applicable, shall use only organic fertilizers and pesticides on the lawn and garden areas located on the site. This condition shall be binding upon the property owner, her heirs, successors, and her assigns, shall be included in any applicable homeowners association rules and regulations, and any covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the proposed development. Number 4, prior to the issuance of a certificate of zoning compliance to permit construction of any unit shown in the plans, the applicant shall present final architectural details to the Advisory Committee on Community Appearance. Thereafter, in accordance with Section 3.12M of the regulations, the Director of Planning and Economic Development shall review final elevations and materials for each dwelling unit to ensure consistency with the approved plan. The Director may then approve a certificate of zoning compliance or refer it to ACA for a recommendation. No deviation from the final elevations and materials shall be permitted without further review by ACA. Number 5, the property owner and/or homeowners association, as applicable, shall maintain the historic ledges residence and all stone walls located on the site as proposed in the application. This condition shall be binding upon the property owner, her heirs, successors, and/or assigns, and shall be included in any applicable homeowners association rules and regulations, and any covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the proposed development.
Thank you. That's a rather comprehensive list. Are there any other matters or issues that should be conditioned? That
There
anyone?
was the condition I read earlier, which I'll just state again, regarding the water service.
Correct.
The owner of the project will be responsible to maintain water service to the adjacent and in vicinity properties, and will be responsible for all costs associated with the final water facilities plan. Such plan shall be in place prior to the start of any construction activity. And then the outstanding item, as I see it, is related to the library's request to be included in the pre-blast survey.
So I have a comment. I think the proximity of the library to the blasting site is quite far. I think the adjacent, there are adjacent residents and properties that would be affected far sooner that were not included in the original blast survey. So I think that is a little bit extraordinary and onerous to put that on the applicant to essentially start over with the blasting survey. As for the long list that was just read, considering the applicants to councils submitted that would not be considered onerous. I think I would be willing to support a motion, including Dave's interpretation of Mike Ott's condition, as well as those 5 conditions that were just read.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
So was that a motion, or do you want to make a motion to that?
That is my motion, yes. I motion to approve the application on its surface with the addition of those 5 conditions that were submitted by the applicant's counsel, as well as Mr. Ott's condition on the water service to the adjoining neighbors that use that feed, with the addition of Dave Anderson's additional sentence or 2 of language.
Okay. May I have a second to Joe's motion?
Second.
Second from Tom Berland. Thank you, Tom. Discussion.
I have one thing just for clarification purposes. So there's 2 applications that you're going to need to take action on tonight. One is the special exception permit application. The other is the coastal site plan. So I'd suggest that maybe Joe's motion and any subsequent vote would be pursuant to the special exception permit application. And then we could take a separate vote on the coastal site plan.
Makes sense. So discussion.
So, Ron, sure, if I may, I've got I think maybe a similar thought with maybe a little bit more elaboration on the premise of the library being included in a blast survey. The historic section of the library just came out of however long it was, months on top of months on top of months of massive construction going on around it with all kinds of vibration, steelwork, compaction, all of that stuff immediately adjacent to the building. And I don't have privity to the library's contract with the owner's rep, but I have to imagine that a lot of significant record of documentation was developed before the library was accepted from the contractor. And I have to imagine that any impacts from that kind of construction immediately adjacent to the historic part of the building would have been very well noted, as well as the condition of the addition prior to being accepted. So in addition to it being, far outside the radius, I have to imagine that there's pretty significant documentation on its condition as almost brand new at this point, not quite brand new.
Thank you, Joel. Okay. Any other discussion?
I do, sorry, I have one more point is I think you may want to articulate, I think Ron Clark said it earlier, if you're trying to make a motion for approval, you may want to articulate that you find the application consistent with the plan of conservation and development and with the zoning regulations and potentially as supported by the testimony submitted by the applicant, because there's quite a bit of testimony that they've submitted to support approval of their application. You might want to reference that specifically.
Okay.
And I just have a question for clarification, or is the motion to approve the application as submitted for these 7 units?
Yes, so I motion to approve based upon our plan of conservation and development and within the special exception permit and on the special exception permit within our zone of cluster housing. I find it consistent with our rules and regulations, and I motion to approve the building application as submitted with the 6 conditions we have previously noted.
Just to correct the special exception application, not the building application.
Oh, is
Right,
that,
Jeff?
I'm sorry. Yes, you were
No,
correct.
it's a, just for clarification. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, well, I'll call a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye, raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
So we have Joe, Ron, Joel,
Giselle,
Giselle, Peter,
Tom,
Tom. Opposed? We have Jim, Elliot, and John. Does that account for everybody? 6-3? Motion carries. So it's been a long
well,
process.
we still need to make the coastal.
Coastal site plan, right.
And just
Anybody
to,
here?
I just want to remind everybody that we did refer the coastal site plan up to DEP. And this was some time ago, but we did get a response from DEP via email from Marcy Balint dated March 18th, which is up on the screen now. And it, the middle paragraph suggests that they will not be reviewing or formally responding to this referral at this time. Please note, not commenting should not be construed as either approval or disapproval of the coastal site plan application by this office. So that was the correspondence we received. And if you were to make a motion to approve the application, you would do so by saying that it's consistent with the goals and policies of the Connecticut Coastal Management Act.
Somebody like to make a motion to that effect?
I'll let somebody else motion on that.
Okay. Someone else, please, make a motion.
Ron, I'll move to approve the coastal application and find that it's consistent with the policies and guidance set forth in the Connecticut Coastal Management Act.
Thank you, Joel.
I'll second that.
All right. And any discussion on that? All in favor, signify by saying aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
What do we have? All opposed? So we have. Okay, so that was same 6-3,
No, I'm abstaining.
abstaining, 6-2-1.
I was going to abstain also, I'm sorry.
Okay, on what
So
basis?
6-1-2.
Okay, any particular reason? Not that you have to have one for the abstentions?
No.
Okay, you want on the record, all right. So that carries, and I assume Mary has all the names of how it voted. Okay, it's been a long, difficult application, and I thank you and everyone who participated for allowing us to do our job. I know there are folks who are not happy with the outcome, and I can understand that. I need not say more, but thank you for your time and input. Anything else anybody wants to add about it before we move on? Okay. Thank you. Next, we have some minutes to work on. Elliot, are you prepared for that tonight?
I am.
Okay.
The first one is our regular meeting from April 15th. Members present: Clark, Madison, Hitchcock, Mathers, Panofsky, McDowell, Hay, and then Berlin. Alternates present: Ruse, Bodenson, and Snow. I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve. Oh, Tom got
Take
it.
that. Joe and Tom? Any discussions or changes?
I didn't see any.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Planning meeting from May 6th, members present Clark, Madison, Berlin, McDowell, and Hay. Alternates present Snow. Entertain a motion.
I move that we accept those minutes. Elliot?
Jim,
I'll second.
second. Ron, second. Any discussions or changes? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Regular meeting, May 20th. Members present, Clark, Madison, Hitchcock, Mathers, Banowski, McDowell, Hay, and Berlin. Alternates present, Ruse, Bodenson, and Snow. We'll entertain a motion for that one.
Motion to approve.
Joe, second.
Second.
Peter. Any discussions or changes? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. And it looks like I am missing the last one for, I think it was June 4th.
Third.
The June 3rd one, for some reason, I don't have it sitting here. I thought I had printed it out. But unfortunately, I don't have that one. Can we push that, continue that one to the next meeting, or?
I have a copy handy if you'd like me to state who was present, who wasn't. So I don't know what the protocol is.
I would think that would work. We've all
Okay.
reviewed.
Elliot?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So this is the, just get to the top.
June 3rd.
Yeah, the regular meeting on June 3rd, members present were Clark, Madison, Hitchcock, Mathers, Banowski, McDowell, Hay, Berlin, and Miller. Members absent, none. Alternates present were Roos, Bodenson, and Snow.
Would entertain a motion on approving that
Motion
one.
to approve.
Joe,
I'll
seconded by Tom. Any changes or discussions?
I
Seeing
think
none.
that was motioned by Tom and seconded by no one.
I thought I saw you go, Joe. I'm sorry.
I was just scratching my
Peter
face.
also has
Oh, he's
hands up.
got you. All right, so it was motion by
say.
Tom, seconded by John. Any changes or discussions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? And John, I thank you for reading off those names for me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot, Elliot. Appreciate that. We had a lot of reading to do to go through all those minutes. A lot of
Yeah.
paper. Comments. Well, we spoke about Marlene. We all wish her the best of luck, and she'll be back soon with her arm problems. It seems like she banged herself up pretty good. Thank you to Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
And also to Maria at Town Hall. I know she's going to be helping with the minutes, but thanks, Mary. It was good to have you back, even though it was just for a night. One thing, I had a quick discussion yesterday or the day before with Peter Gelderman about, and it was passed today, and apparently will be signed by the governor in the next day or so, is the recreational marijuana law has been passed, apparently. And what impacts, as you know, for those of you who remember, we do have some rather restrictive regulations that we acted on a number of years ago in anticipation of medical marijuana sales in town. And what adjustments we'll have to make or should make, what the town overall wants us to make, or yet to be seen or known, what latitude we have or what adjustments we have to make. But it is certainly something we have to pay attention to and anticipate action on. Pete Gelderman said, until you see the 300-page document and they get a chance to read it, no town really is in a position to say this is what we should do or shouldn't do. Plus, it's a public
Hey,
process.
Mike, how are you?
Pardon?
I cannot fucking believe this. I cannot.
I would watch your language, please. You're speaking to the entire community. I don't know who just said that, but I think we should act a little more professionally.
It was not one of the commission members, Ron.
It wasn't a commission member.
Okay. They should act, a little more intelligently, whoever it was. But anyway, it's too early to see what can be done, what should be done. But again, it's a public process as well. So we'll be dealing with that or talking about it in the future. And secondly, I was going to say goodbye to Dave Anderson for his last meeting, but I don't have to do that. I got a 2-week stay of execution.
All right.
Yeah, you got me one more time.
I got one more time, so we'll save that. And we have some top secret plans in the works. Going, Mr. Mathers. That's a secret code, the thumbs up. So details later on. But seriously,
Ron, let me just say, you're awful at keeping a secret.
I know it. But I don't want them to have to make other plans either.
I assume it's going to be a barge out on the Sound during the 4th of July fireworks.
Well, it's actually planning to have it at the floating dock down at West Wharf.
Oh, there we go. For those who can
Maybe
find
that-
out.
The fence is up.
You can just untie it.
It's not a barge, but it's close.
Yeah, someone told me the town was going to do a fireworks display to recognize me. I was really
I think
There you go.
that's it. I think that's, and a parade.
very nice. Yeah, very nice of them.
And that's it. And as far as the ledges were concerned, I've said to a number of people, and I'd appreciate some of the more senior folks to, see if they agree with me or not. Over time, during the course of a long hearing, you kind of get a feel or a sixth sense as to what somebody may think about an application, how they may vote, or how they feel for or against or in the middle. And on this one, I had no idea up until tonight. It was strange that there was nothing that indicated to me, just sixth sense as to where anybody stood on this. I have to say I was a bit on the fence myself anyway, but I don't know whether anybody had that same experience over the years. You get to see, maybe it's by the questions or different things where you, even with the clinic up on Route 80, over time, I think before we voted, we kind of had a good idea of how everybody might vote if you wanted to throw in $1 for each vote you got right. I didn't have a clue. And I just thought that was unusual. Anybody else have that same feeling? Jim?
I agree.
Yeah, no, it was kind of hard to predict what the outcome was going to be. I certainly knew where I was on it before coming into this meeting after hearing both sides. But no, I didn't know where, some of the other players from.
I struggled with it from the get-go. There were things about it I liked and things about it I didn't like, but I want to echo what Joel said earlier tonight. One of the things that really bothered me was how personal the attacks seemed to get at some point, particularly the insinuation that this commission was just a rubber stamper and had no integrity. And I would just like to say how much I appreciate working with all you guys, women, and I feel that it's a very very unpartisan, sincere, caring, concerned, intelligent group of people. And I think you make really good decisions. And if anything swayed me, it's odd that I voted against this, because if anything, the people that were emotionally against this project, and they I don't know, sometimes when they rant and rave, that erodes their credibility in my book. But both sides, the applicant and those that were opposed, I think were showed a lack of class on a number of occasions.
Yeah, I agree. And there was some, which I won't share, but there was some correspondence that was received in another office at Town Hall subsequent to the closing, and called it a kangaroo court, and some other things. And I thought it was particularly interesting because how this person who wrote it had some idea of, if I didn't have an idea, if we didn't have an idea of
Right.
how we were going to vote, how in the world they came to the conclusion that it was a kangaroo court. And there were some other derogatory statements, but that was the most,
Yeah, and Ron, I'd like to add that my negative vote was not because of fear of the veiled threat of a personal lawsuit if we approved it.
Oh yeah, that was just absurd.
That was a stretch.
Yeah, I kept my mouth shut, which is rare for me, right? But the immediate reaction I wanted to make was, I've been on this commission for 12 years. You think we haven't been sued before? Come on.
And Carol and I were observers, didn't get to vote. Frankly, I would have voted against it because the blasting issue is such a, how do I say it, mystery. We have experts on both sides, and I really worry about the blasting and how it could really damage a lot of properties if it's done wrong. But I admired the way you all handle it, and don't begrudge it at all.
I think that there was a lot more testimony given on the applicant side on the safety, quote unquote, of the blasting, not foolproof or not guaranteed. But it also occurred to me that the property owner could walk into Town Hall tomorrow and request a blasting permit for an Olympic-sized swimming pool, or saying that I don't like the look of ledge, I'm going to blast it all off my property, and get a blasting permit.
Wow.
I have to go through those same steps and so forth, but it isn't anything that's unique or anything that they couldn't do without getting a special exception. And
yeah,
but it occurred to me.
But our conservation plan calls this the heart and soul of Madison, and I worry that we're going to have a ruptured aorta or a damaged soul because of the blasting. I hope not, but if it happens, it's going to be troubling. But again, I don't begrudge the decision at all.
Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from.
I'd like to just add a few comments. That obviously, I'm still learning. And I think we have a lot to learn from the General's Residence project. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. And now I think we'll have a lot to learn from this one as well.
And what would you like to learn from it? I mean,
Did we make the right decisions? I was opposed to this project myself, and I'm having trouble because we have a General's Residence project without the General's Residence so far, and I'm worried that we'll have a ledges without the ledges. And so, I think that yes, they fulfilled the requirements, and I think we'll just see how it goes and how the community responds to both of those projects.
Carol, key to me, my thinking was with the Generals project, what was really different about that is the neighbors went from being vehemently opposed to supporting because the way the applicant dealt with the neighbors.
Right.
And yeah, there is no Generals residence there now, but if you recall, the plans were that there was going to be a type of replica built. So I'm expecting that to be built because they said they were going to do it. So I hope they do.
And it will, I think, yeah.
No, I think undoubtedly it will. I hear from the grapevine that 7 of the units have been sold already. And the 2 that haven't been sold are the General's residence itself, but it's primarily because they intended to do that last. And they really can't give a realistic date. Is it going to be ready in February of next year or June? So it makes it difficult for a buyer at this point with no construction actually taking place to make that commitment to move into it when they're really not clear as to when it might be available to live in. That's what I get from, just background noise. But, or maybe they wanted to get the revenue from the standalone units to help finance the other, but I have every expectation that'll be done.
Have the accusations or allegations, I should say, allegations of silt runoff and impact on neighbors' properties, have those been substantiated at the General's residence? That there's,
the only thing that was brought to my attention was over the winter time, one of the immediate neighbors had some flooding on their property adjacent to the project, and to my knowledge, that was corrected. The developer and his engineer were responsive. I communicated with that homeowner. I visited the site, but that was again back in the winter time, and I have not received any subsequent complaints or viewed any issues out there. So I would say to that comment that no, I don't think they were substantiated.
Well, John, I'm keeping July 4th open, so for the barge, so just let me know what time.
July 2nd is the day you want to be on the barge. Come on down to the West Wharf on July 2nd. The fireworks are great.
You get home at 4 a.m. and you get through all the traffic. You might as well walk under here for Pete's sake.
That's a good idea to walk down. Yeah.
Peter and I can do that.
Yeah, you're lucky. You and Peter, you could do a little bed and breakfast that night. And,
We just go out in our backyards.
Great.
That's nice. So does anybody have any other comments or thoughts? I just want to say thank you, everybody. It's been a long haul, particularly with the Ledges application. And I, like John said, I appreciate very much all your thought, comment, and balanced judgments, whichever direction they fell. It was well done. And I'm proud of what you did. The outcome doesn't make any difference. It was the journey, not the destination. You did a great job.
Thanks for your leadership.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron. And I got a little sporty a little while ago, but I really just don't appreciate being bullied. In the 12 years that we've been here, I've never had that happen. And you've been here the whole time I have. So, I think you get it.
This, I'll also add this correspondence that will remain anonymous also said that I should recuse myself because I recognize, remember Mrs. Lupone who spoke at the last
year? Oh, yes.
That I allowed her to speak for a second time, which shows bias. What this writer forgot to also include, must be just absent-minded, that we also allowed, as I recall, Mr. Franks, who was and also Robin Phillips, who spoke the first time and spoke for a second time in opposition to the application. But, never let the facts interfere with the good letter. So that points to some of the things that Joel mentioned and John and Joe. But, and maybe they're just beginning now. I suppose we'll see some letters to the paper and so forth, but we did our best. And we may ultimately find that a judge decides this application, not us. That's up
Speaking
to
of
the,
judges, I think the Madison Hotel issues before the Supreme Court. And should be decided this summer or in the fall, I would think, but you want it at the appellate court level, so.
Yeah, we already had the hearing with the Supreme Court, and we're just awaiting a decision on it.
Yeah.
so. Yeah, I didn't realize that was appealed.
Yeah.
It was overturned, then they appealed it, huh?
Yeah, appealed and appealed, right? Yeah. It's hard to believe a zoning issue goes before the state Supreme Court, but it did.
Well, it's unusual that the trial court came out so hard against you and the appellate court just ignored them and did its own decision. So the Supreme Court has an
Unanimously.
interesting decision.
Three judges unanimously, I might add.
Yeah, no, I think you're in good shape.
Well, we'll see. Yeah.
The one thing we can point to ourselves is this was never before P and Z.
Yeah.
Hotel was all
Right.
done with variances.
Yeah. Zoning
Yeah.
Board of Appeals. Yeah.
Yeah. So we never had a bite of the apple, but I don't know whether that is an apple I really wanted to bite.
Yeah.
But if you haven't read the town's attorney's opinion, it's really well done. It's I mean, the town won at the trial court level, but it's such a good brief. I would think the Supreme Court would use it for different reasons. So.
Hey, Ron, as much as I love you guys, would you mind if I hung
I'll
up?
second that motion.
Yeah.
I agree. We're all.
I've already seconded your
See you
motion.
July 2nd.
Are you putting that in the form of a motion, Tom?
I am.
Okay.
I've already seconded it.
And it's already been seconded before. it was
Aye.
first. So I won't ask for a vote. I'll just say meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
I
am by.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Enjoy this
Bye,
enjoy
guys.
this nice run of nice weather.
Good night.